Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Issei destroy the whole world and kill everyone? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Skylinemaster for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. Hey, Issei, will you die for me? Amano Yuma asked into Issei's ear. She leaned back, expecting to see a confusing or stunned face from her date. To her disbelief, Issei looked at her, his head tilted, his face of pitying condescension. His face broken into a slight smile as he gradually stepped back away from her. I was wondering how long our little date would occur before you popped the question. A fitting place, I might add, fallen angel, he said, his words stinging on condescension, as if an adult caught a child misbehaving. Amano Yuma's face turned into one of sadism, with her face changing to a scantily clad, leather-wearing angel with black wings. Issei looked on, unimpressed. So, the maggot knows of what I am. No matter, you'll be dead either way, she said, forming a light spear in her hand. Issei simply smiled, a rather unhinged smile. Nice light spear, he whistled as he chanted underneath his breath. Arg! The fallen angel screamed out, breaking the light spear into pieces as she collapsed to the ground. What did you do to me? She shouted out, her hands and knees were on the ground, shaking. Latin, it is very versatile in my opinion. Not as great as Enochian though, he remarked, kneeling to raise her chin up with his. Her snarling, rage-filled face contrasted with his perfectly calm face. It's an angel-depowering spell, should wear off in a few hours. That'll get us enough time to get to a more private place, Issei said, standing up to give her a taste of his shoe. Not once, not twice, but several times, who knows how many. Issei himself lost count after 8. She'll live, he wasn't worried about that. Rainer probably would have preferred that, to save herself from what he planned for her. After 8 o'clock on a Sunday, most people are gearing up for the Monday ahead. Students busy with the homework they neglected over the weekend, salarymen getting their brief relaxation in preparation for an 80-plus work week, followed by excessive amounts of shitty karaoke and only slightly better alcohol. All in all, most normal people would be getting ready for the night, and some much-needed sleep. Not Issei Hayato though, he is just getting started with his night. In a warehouse just outside of the city, Issei was humming a song, the same song that was playing on the speakers. This warehouse, a former manufacturing plant, was his second home. Or yet better phrased, one of his second homes. Now, just how does a high schooler afford this building? Issei was wealthy and money wasn't an issue to say the least. After a certain incident that Issei may or may not have caused, he needed to get food on the table at home. God knows it wouldn't have been Issei's mother, who had a mental breakdown after the death of her husband, as she is in a padded white room in a mental institution a few hours north of Ko. It was a good system that Issei liked. He was left to his own devices and his mother gets a paid supply of meds as part of her confinement. As for how he was about to afford this building, let's just say dead beings don't generally need their belongings anymore. The music suddenly stopped, causing Issei to glance ever so slightly from his latest victim. After a brief pause, the music came again, playing classical music. Issei glanced back at his victim, blood covering her once beautiful face. Her arms have numerous cuts and pokes in them, blood mixing with whatever various of substances Issei injected her with. The fallen angel was chained up to a wooden table, with shackles on her hands, legs, and throat. There were esoteric sigils on the floor under her, the ceiling above her, and on all of the walls. Issei is very thorough, always double-checking the sigil work to make sure there are no breaks in the sigil. Issei examined the scalpel, noting the blood on it. He looked down at his blood-stained white scrubs, his gloved hands, and then at the scalpel again. Putting the scalpel near his, he summoned the blood off the blade. His tongue tasted the blood, admiring its irony taste as the tongue cleaned the blade. After cleaning the blade he used to sever her vocal cords. He put it down on the table with all the other ominous-looking tools that wouldn't be out of place in a surgery or torture room. Issei doesn't think of himself as a torturer. No, that sounds so crass. He prides himself on being a reverse surgeon instead. The fallen angel used this moment of respite to gather her will back. He hadn't asked her anything yet, but she wouldn't tell him anything regardless. She won't break under torture. You don't have anything I don't already know, Rainer, he remarked, his first words in over 4 hours. And yes, I am telepathic. Bit of a hassle if you asked me, always being able to hear people's best and darkest thoughts. Occasionally advantageous, hearing COs do training, but for every one of those, there are 10 of does Kiba like me, or does this dress make my look big? Gets tiresome very fast, he said, looking at a syringe filled with a strange purple liquid. Thankfully, I have selective hearing with that now, took a long time to train. A small smile came on his face, as he effed the syringe to get rid of the air bubbles. Oh, and your last comment that you won't break. We'll see about that. You know, they all say that. Last fallen, geez, I forget his name already, but he said that he wouldn't break as well. It was quite cute, I must say, but in the end, behind all of that bravado and arrogance, they all shatter. I push them to the abyss, and there is no more rest for them, only more pain. He used his free hand to find an unused vein. Ah, this left vein works. He locked eyes with her, his eyes completely dead while hers are filled with a flaming resolution, a show of strength. A small smile appeared back on his face at this. The record was 95 hours. Let's see if you can resist any longer. Not that I don't know, but it is just a game of wills. He shrugged his shoulders at her next thought. What can I say? Even screams get boring to me. They start off as a symphony of sweet music, then they turn into a cacophony of nails on a chalkboard, he said in a soft voice, pushing the needle into her veins slowly. He fought back a smile as her eyes bulged out. If she could scream, she'd probably be able to wake the entire city. His wrist watch started to beep. Boy, where does the time go? It sure flies by when you are having fun, doesn't it? He turned his back away from the woman who was in agony, as he rolled over in four. Sticking the needle to her arm, he yawned. You know, I never did get to properly thank you for this date, he said, taking off his bloody scrubs and gloves. Rainier, I hope we can have as much fun as we did next time. His alarm clock woke him up exactly at 6:30 in the morning. He opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling of his room. His room was utterly plain, save for a bed and a desk with a computer on it. If one just saw the room, they would assume the previous occupant was about to move. This was the room Issei had in this warehouse, a place that he could go to sleep when his activities got too late. They were all the same, the rooms, in all of Issei's properties. As were the kitchens and the bathrooms. Issei walked down the stairs, his backpack slung over his shoulder. After taking a shower, he put on his school uniform and ventured off to make breakfast. After glancing at the still-bound Rainier, he proceeded to make himself a quick sandwich for lunch, and just some eggs for breakfast. Putting everything in his bag and washing the dishes, he walked up to Rainier, who was unconscious, and leaned in her ear. There is a slow-acting poison in your body. It is known to kill your kind within 24 hours, so if your friends are coming, they'd better come soon, he said, pulling back and observing her. Turning around and heading towards the door with a key, he looks at her one last time. Now you best behave yourself while I am at school. See you in a few hours. High school, the bane on most teenagers live. The place that they are mandated to go for at least 8 hours a day by the government, but more importantly, their parents. Many, especially in Japan, go in with the expectation of passing high school to get into a good college, finding a good job, and perhaps starting a family in the future. As such, there are many elite schools that can help students get into elite colleges, Ko Academy being one of them. Issei Hayado is one of Ko Academy's few male students since the integration from a previously all-female school. There were other schools that Issei looked into enrolling himself into, namely Ko Central High School or Ishikawa High School, but Ko was his number one choice. 3 main reasons for his decision to attend. Firstly, it was the closest out of all 3, a decision prompted by laziness more than anything. Secondly, they offered him a full scholarship due to his kendo skills, otherwise the tuition would have been obscene, even for someone with his finances. Third and most importantly, the 2 devil heiresses attended the school, Citri and Gremery. He knew of them, Rias Gremery and Sona Citri, silently laughing at the arrogance of the Gremery girl. At least the Citri went by a different name in school, not Rias, who might as well have put up a giant sign saying, "Devil here," on her forehead. Is she really that arrogant in assuming no one reads the Ars Goetia? Now, he hasn't had any interactions with either of them, nor their peerages. His life was really simple: go to school, pretend to pay attention to the teachers rambling on in whatever class he was in, go to the roof to avoid people during lunch, go back to class for the rest of the day, and then head to the kendo club before heading home. Now, Issei wasn't a loner by any stretch of the imagination, as evident by a list generated by the girls of Ko Academy. With Kiba Yuto being the prince of Ko Academy, Issei was somehow named the Ronin of Ko Academy and the second most popular male at the academy. That attracted a lot of female attention, and most of it was from the kendo club which he was a part of. Issei frankly loathed all the attention. While it was no problem for him to present a charming facade in school, most conversations that occur cause him to think of the most brutal way to kill the girls who got on his nerves the most, while smiling in their faces. And the thoughts, they were the worst. Such incoherent and utterly unimportant ramblings from hormonal teenage girls which he could never fully tune out. A lesser man would have been driven insane. Issei struggled to suppress the urge to murder everyone during the lecture on mathematics, in part due to his in-depth on this subject already, as well as the thoughts of his classmates. A silent buzzing sound from his phone alerted Issei that his trap has been set in motion. A small smile crept up on Issei's face. While he couldn't see what has happened live, he would see it when he gets some free time at home. 5 minutes earlier. So, this is the place? Calawarner asked the other two fallen angels. Yes, it was a weak pulse of energy, but I managed to follow it over here, Donasek said, looking grimly at the building in front of him. Now, there was nothing special about this warehouse that any human could see. That being said, the fallen angels outside saw that this building was covered in sigils hidden from the eye. Enochian, he said, tracing the outline of the sigil. Whoever has Rainier definitely knew what they were doing. The sigils hid the presence of an angel, as well as kept their power under control. The fallen angels couldn't remove the sigils themselves, but they don't need to. Exorcists. Break the sigils, Calawarner said, addressing the small group of a dozen or so exorcists assembled. The fallen angels pointed to the numerous sigils that needed to be broken, and with remarkable efficiency, the exorcists cut, scratched out, or painted over the sigils. Feeling the magic gone, the fallen angels kicked down the reinforced steel door and walked inside. There, in the middle of the room, they saw an unconscious Rainier. Got caught by an average human, huh? Donasek said, whistling while examining the inside of the warehouse. It was bare, with a small kitchen off to the side and a bathroom area near the back. There was a small set of stairs on the right side, but he could feel no one else in here. Check the rest of the place to make sure no one else is here. You 5, Donasek said, pointing at 5 random exorcists. Start destroying all the sigils you can see. The exorcists did as instructed, with half or so of the exorcists scurrying around the rest of the place while the 5 hand-picked ones started carving out the sigils. Noticing the one on the ceiling, the exorcists took out their light guns and started shooting at the sigil. The bullet holes impacted the sigil, destroying its power. Shouldn't have underestimated him now, right? Middle teased, cutting the metal shackles with a light spear. Rainier slumped to the floor, causing the fallen angels to gather around her. Donasek crouched down and put a hand on her neck before standing back up. Save it, Middlet. We still need to find the boy that did this, Calawarner said, licking her at the thought of getting her hands on the boy who did this to a comrade. A few miles away, Issei suddenly had the urge to lick his as well. His weren't going dry now, were they? He hissed and went back to pretending to listen to his teacher. We've swept the entire building, there is no one else here, the exorcist said, reassembling in front of the fallen angels. Donasek gestured towards Rainier, and 2 exorcists scrambled to pick her up and support her. She's poisoned with something that is suppressing her natural defenses. Let's get her back, Donasek said, walking past the exorcists. Oh, if it only were that simple. The moment Donasek walked past the broken sigil on the floor, everyone in the building was forced to the ground. The first of Issei's many fail-safes were triggered after 1 minute of Rainier being released. The pressure was unbearable, preventing anyone from lifting their heads up. A high-pitched wailing sound piercing the ears of all, and since they couldn't cover their ears, their eardrums exploded. Water soon fell on them, burning all the fallen angels. The devil water was like an acid, rapidly disintegrating the skin of the fallen angels as well as disrupting their healing factor. The humans weren't lucky, with the entire group being struck by devil lightning. The electric shock killed all of the exorcists and fallen by frying their internal organs, as well as causing third-degree burns. Issei's fail-safes had claimed another few lives. The souls of the exorcists don't go to heaven, no, not even close. Issei's fail-safe will make sure of it. Issei stood across from Kates, a bakken in her hand. Issei had a calm expression on his face, his brown eyes hidden with the rest of his face underneath his protective mask. His posture was relaxed in anticipation of a strike as the two circled each other. Kates lunged at him, the first move of the spar. Slow, so slow. Issei sidestepped her strike, knocking her sword out of the way with a simple upward thrust. Recovering his from action, Kates tried a simple sideways slash to which Issei countered by ducking under her arc and landing an upward slash, sliding up from her protector to her mask. Point! Murayama shouted from the sidelines. The two went back to their starting positions and bowed to each other. Issei removed his helmet and smiled at Kates. Kates, you've been improving, that strike was faster than before. He noticed the reddening of her cheeks from his compliment, quietly sickening him. Such petty hormones and a lack of control over them. Thanks, Issei, but I still can't catch up to you, she said, recovering from her early blush. Issei was about to give a compliment he didn't believe in when he noticed a figure leaning against the wall. "Ah, Kiba, how can I help you?" Issei said, a smile still on his face. He could read the thoughts of Kiba, wanting to bring him to his master's lair like the good lapdog he is. That sweet smile hid all the dark secrets of Kiba's memories, but Issei read them as if they were in a book. He'd shake his head, but he wouldn't do that in front of Kiba, not yet anyways. "Issei Hayabu, President Rias asked me to escort you to my club room. Are you available now?" The smile on Kiba's face made Issei want to permanently staple his shut. Issei knew it was coming, yet he didn't have a plan for this, a rarity for him. "I would love to, but I have to check on a little pest problem at my home right now. Can this wait until tomorrow?" Issei noticed a slight faltering of Kiba's smile, too fast for the average human to notice, but Issei noticed it just fine. "Of course." Kiba's smile looked as if it had never moved an inch. "Just please find me after classes tomorrow then. If you'll excuse me now, I have a thing to attend to," Issei said, excusing himself and heading home to check on his latest catch. Issei stared at the sparkling clean main room of his warehouse, a small smile visible on his otherwise blank face. There is a spell for nearly everything. Use these spells in conjunction with each other, and the events seem to never have happened. The events being the cleaning up for all the water, clearing the burnt flesh smell, moving the bodies to the secret room, and the rebuilding of the door. If these magicians that originally made these spells could see the mundane purposes that their creations were being used for, they would have rolled over in their graves, seeing their powerful spells used in such a way. Issei sighed, his hands on his pockets. If only there was a rebuilding sigil spell, that would have made life a bit easier. Issei's eyes turned upwards. It is going to be a bitch to rebuild the sigil and place it back on the ceiling. Issei walked behind Kibayudo, a distance far enough to dodge anything that the devil would have been able to hit him with should he have chosen to, but not far enough to warrant suspicion. The two headed to the clubroom, a front for the activities of the Occult Research Club. He knew of the devils in this area, narrowly missing them when he accidentally butchered one of their clients. In his defense, he didn't know that that woman was a client of them. Would it have mattered though? Probably not, Issei shrugged. Their thoughts were getting louder and louder with every step he took towards the clubroom. The mindless munching of sweets of Kaneko Tuju, hiding the Nikomata's tragic backstory, the perverted thoughts of Akino Himejima covering up the pain of the loss of her mother. She definitely has some unresolved issues regarding her abandonment by her father, and her identity crisis, or as Issei would call it, daddy issues, and the king herself. Rias Gremory. The sensation of the steamy shower she took master brain eager to get Issei in her peerage to beat Riser Phoenix. He knew of how she thought the meeting was going to go and simply smirked. Such greed, only to be torn down from its pedestal. Seriously, these devils need better mental security. Now, he was a pretty good mind reader if you got him to admit it, but this was just pathetic. And Riser Phoenix, the third son of the famous Phoenix clan? He knew of them, their supposed immortality, and their tears, but he never saw one in person. He'd made a mental note for later, as who knows how this information could play a part in his future plans. The door opened, Kiba leading Issei into the room. The smirk on Issei's face was replaced by a kind, relatively neutral smile, a smile perfected over the course of several years as he saw Sanoshirt Orai, student council president, there as well. That explained the other presence that he felt. At least one had the sense of mental security. His eyes darted at each piece of the expensive furniture, then at Akino and Kaneko, before turning around to see Kiba. Is that a shower running? Issei already knew the answer to that, but it would be suspicious if he knew what that sound was out loud. Stating the obvious can be a great benefit, if used sparingly. Yes, President Rias is taking a shower right now and will be out in a few minutes. Tea? Akino offered. Issei noticed the scent of the tea, but didn't say anything. Yes, please. Issei smiled as Akino poured tea into cup. His guard was up, in case his tea was poisoned, which he doubted. Just a first impression, they wouldn't be hostile right off the bat, and poisoning his tea would have definitely warranted death of all of them. Issei took a seat, noting the positions of each of the devils in the room. Kiba was to his back and Issei wasn't sure if he could outrun a knight, even in his state. Kaneko was to his left, munching on baked goods. He could handle himself in a fight, and he had the weapons at his disposal. The big thing would be getting as much distance as he could from her if needed. Akino was the magical user of the group, the least of his concerns. Issei knew that Rias would be next to Akino as the king, and her family's famed power of destruction would be most troublesome. While he was sure that he could take it, there was no need to take the risk if he didn't need to. Sauna was the real threat here. He could feel her magical power, and her sharp gaze made him deem her a threat. Citri, water-based magic. He'd heard rumors of their talent with that type of magic, but he is confident that he could counter any water-based magic with its natural enemy, fire. There was the door he came through, as well as several windows to Aquino, Sauna, and maybe Rias's back. If things went south, he could rush Aquino and hold her hostage. He'd use her as a human shield, then circle towards the door with her in front of her to deter attacks, drag her along as he made his way to the exit, and then push her towards them as he ran. Plan B would be using her as a hostage but making his way to the windows, pushing her towards her friends while he jumped out the windows and made a break for it. There was also the risk of fighting all of them at once. The extent of Sauna's magic and Rias with her power of destruction being a complete unknown to him. Maybe he should take her hostage instead? That in itself brought a new set of complications, which Issei worked to plan out. Issei noticed the silencing of the water and prepared himself to meet Rias. He thought of all possibilities of what she might ask him even though he had a pretty good idea. The conversations played out mentally as Rias played her little spiel on introductions before asking him a question. Rias sat next to Sauna, with Aquino standing to the left of both of them. So I understand that you've had a date yesterday? Expected first question. Now how to approach? The fool, the soldier, or the sage? The soldier it is. He could progress below and above his intelligence with his responses, and no one would suspect a thing. Go with the fool and they expect the fool, not a shift to a sage. Same with the other way, and both would bring too much suspicion on him. The middle way it is then. Yes, I went on a date with Amano Yuma. It was a pretty tame date if I say so myself. One confirmed question and one potential question out of the way. What happened at the end of the date if you don't mind me asking? Expected again from Rias. He felt Sauna's gaze just peering at him, but no attempt at a mental assault. Well, it was really strange. True if he was human. Yeah, she grew like black wings. Like angel wings. His eyes opened. He was brought out of his meditation and got up. Issei walked outside, the barrier alerting him of Rias Gremery's arrival. What is this place? She asked. Issei simply looked at the building, a warehouse just outside of town and one of Issei's many homes. To the eye, it would appear to be just another old factory, but to the supernatural, this place was heavily guarded with wards, allowing no one in or out with permission. It's a little place I stay in. Anyways, you should be feeling a bit tired when you get inside. It is normal, just a side effect of the wards. Issei halted, just outside of the door. You didn't alert anyone of this, right? No, they don't know I'm here. Issei unlocked the door and walked in, Rias following slowly behind him. Issei stood in front of a podium, a thing covered up by a gray tarp behind him. There were 3 occupied seats in front of him. Walburga, Chow Chow, and Rias were all seated away from each other, with the first 2 giving the latter a frosty glance. Issei banged the gavel and cleared his throat. Well, since we have a newcomer, I'll reiterate the rules of auctioning. He glanced at Chow Chow as he spoke. Well, this is an auction about a sacred gear user. You all will respect the outcome of the auction and promise to not throw a hissy fit at the result, he said, causing a sideways glance at Walburga. The German magician simply stuck her tongue out at him. Anyways, introductions. Rias Gremery, these 2 are Chow Chow and Walburga. Chow Chow and Walburga, Rias Gremery, although I'm sure you already know about that. Rias perked up at the names. Chow Chow, the hero of the Romance of the 3 Kingdoms. Never heard about the other one, Rias said, mainly for herself. Yes, Issei said, pulling the tarp from over the object. Inside of a fluid-filled capsule, Asia Argento was suspended. Rias gasped as Issei glanced in her direction. Knowing what she was about to say, he put his hand up. I know what you are about to say. What did you think this auction was about? He said with a blank expression. I thought it was going to be an actual item. Not a person, Rias exclaimed as he shook his head. Whatever, what you should know is that there is a rare sacred gear in her, he said, pointing at Asia. Have you heard of the sacred gear Twilight Healing? Rias put her to her chin in thought, Twilight Healing rolling the words off her tongue. It is a healing sacred gear? Issei nodded. It is said to be able to heal any injuries. Naturally, I haven't tested that theory out, but I will demonstrate the effects of the sacred gear to the winner of the auction. A great addition to your peerage, is it not? Rias didn't speak, prompting Issei to commence the auction. Okay, we will begin the bidding now. What do you each have to offer? Chow Chow was the first to speak, the I Ching from the Xia dynasty. Issei nodded, silently appraising the item. Ancient Chinese shamanism from that time was hard to come by, so it was a pretty good offer. He glanced at Walburga, who stood up. Copy of Johann Reuchlin's translation of Sefer Razi al-Hamalek. Issei was quite content with his knowledge of Jewish magic, so he placed her bid lower than Chow Chow's in his mind. Looking at the final bidder, he saw Rias fidget. I can get you 2 other books from the list you gave me. Issei didn't outwardly show emotion, but became happy at the development. However, the real offers were going to come. I'll throw in Lightning by Legong. You will get Heinrich Agrippa's 3rd edition of Pagan Germanic Traditions of the Middle Ages, The Bidding War. All right, I must say that Rias's bid at the top. He turned to Rias. Make it 4, and see if anyone wants to match you. Rias clenched her fists. I'll make it 5. Chow Chow Walburga. This is your chance to counter. He saw Chow Chow's gritted teeth, and Walburga's sadistic face glaring daggers at the Gremry heiress. Going once, twice he held the gavel in the air, just in case a last-minute bid came up. Sold to Rias Gremry. Maybe next time, Chow Chow, Issei said, mocking the Chinese youth. Said youth simply glared at the soulless boy as he used a magic circle to teleport away. Nah, Issei. A lithe arm made its way around Issei's back into Issei's abs. Issei frowned at the physical contact by the German magician. What? He asked, not turning around to see Walburga. Mao, it is like you don't even like me. I'm starting to think you are gay. Such is a useless feeling, love. Physical reproduction does not need to be determined with love. It is simply finding a partner with suitable genes and then engaging in coitus. She can come willingly or by force, does not matter to me. Ah, you've already done it? Her voice purred, with her hand sliding down to Issei's pants. Issei removed the hand and stepped back. Mul times since I was 13. He turned to face her, his face the impassive mask it usually was. Please do leave, I have a client to attend to, he said, turning around. But I have something important to tell you. Issei stopped in his tracks, not bothering to look back at the magician. Then give me a call. Congratulations, thank you for your payment. Issei looked at the 5 books on the ground, mentally dissecting everything he expected inside each. The 3 of them, Issei, Rias, and Asia, stood in the middle of a field under the pale moonlight. Her sacred gear, Rias said flatly. Issei nodded. You want a demonstration. He turned around, his back towards Rias. Have you heard rumors of a sacred gear extractor, in limited use by the fallen angels? I have. I don't believe it though. The balance of power would shift too much to the fallen angels, something we and the angels won't tolerate. Issei laughed a humorless laugh. I haven't seen it, but they are second to the party. He turned, staring the Gremry girl in the eyes. I have devised a method of extraction of sacred gears, leaving the host intact. Rias gasped, her eyebrows up. That's impossible. Lord Beelzebub has tried that for years and has failed. Not to mention the various other factions trying the same thing. Issei shook his head. You all are very intelligent, millennia upon millennia of time. Yet you haven't figured it out. He stared at Rias's face. He tilted his head, his face looking at the ground. Separating souls from sacred gears? Child's play with the right books, different applications of conventional spells, and a large dose of psychedelic drugs which I allowed to work. Lots of dragons, but they give you good information. He laughed out. I do believe that Sauna will not hear of my occasional dabbling in substances that might land me in Japanese prison forever? Rias nodded. Issei sighed. I do believe that I am getting ahead of myself. He materialized a wooden stake in his left hand, and without warning, stabbed it through his right hand. He made no sound while Rias shrieked at the bloody sight. He turned his head at the nun, who was under a mind control spell, and she started walking towards him. She crouched down, removing the stake and then placing both of her hands over the wound. A green light appeared over the wound, closing it up. Her eyes were lifeless the entire process, her age. Thank you, Asia, he said while looking at the Gremry heiress. That proof enough? Yes. That is quite fine, Rias said, looking like she was going to vomit. Now, getting back to what I was saying before. I can remove her sacred gear, it comes with a price though. Or you can keep her as is and do whatever you want with her. I'll take her as she is. Issei pondered the hypocrisy on that statement, but didn't mention anything. Since the challenge was accepted, and will start on Monday, let me ask you something. How far are you willing to go ensure your victory? He asked, staring at her eyes. He saw her eyes waver in determination for a minute, but then became steady. I'll do everything it takes, even if it means risking everything you love? Your peerage? What do you mean by that? He heard the momentary fear in her voice. As I mentioned before, I can separate sacred gears from their users. What good is a sacred gear in the wild, other than denying access to your enemies? Sure, it is good, but it is even better if you can implant them in yourself. Does that mean you can? Yes, I can implant sacred gears in your peerage. He looked Rias straight in the face. There are some things I need to tell you as you consider this though. I'm telling you this not because I believe in honor or anything, but more as you know what you get, so you can't try to kill me when something inevitably happens," he continued. "Tinkering around with them is very interesting. The big man made them well, I admit. Once you've removed them from the soul, they become unstable for a lack of a better term. If you pair them with an incompatible soul, things can happen. Bad things to say the least. Insanity, implosion, spontaneous combustion. Call it the man's failsafe on the bright side. If compatible, you can use them. They just degrade faster. Not as strong as they could be, and their uses are relatively limited. It pisses me off that I can't figure out why." Issei mentioned this as casually as if he was talking about the weather. Rias had an incredulous look on her face as she heard everything. "Are you crazy?" "I'm not going to do that to my peerage," Rias yelled out. Issei shrugged his shoulders before putting a palm up. "Calm down, I'm simply offering up options to you. That being said, it is your choice." "No," Rias said firmly. Issei nodded. "I respect your decision." Issei glanced at Asia, who collapsed on the ground. "I've released the mind control spell on her, and she should awake within a few hours." He squatted down, grabbing all the books. A bright yellow magic circle began to form under him. "Well, enjoy your new purchase. I'll see you Monday morning for training." As Issei read the first book that Rias gave him, his phone rang. The darkness of the room made the screen of the phone shine that much brighter as Issei let it ring several times. Knowing who called him, he put the phone to his ear without a thought. Hey, are you free from that bitch now?" Walburga continued in her sing-song voice. "You know, I always took you for a Yandere. Anyways, what was so important earlier?" He heard Walburga's laugh over the phone before an eerie silence came over the line. Issei was about to answer when the German magician spoke. "Do you want to help start the end of the world? Starting a new life in a foreign country can be a new experience. Starting it in one of the biggest city's worst neighborhoods is downright nerve-wracking. Starting it as a minority from a different country is downright insane." Issei is not insane, however. Everything he does is part of a greater plan. Low income, high crime rate area. A perfect place for him to hone his skills. Ko was too hot for him now, so he needed to expand his horizons. America was in his sights for a long time anyways, so it became the perfect time. It was easier than expected. The first day at the middle school he attended, he didn't need to do anything. Just dress up in the Japanese-style school uniform, and watch everyone snicker and whisper about you. "Yo, Issei." Issei ignored the Hispanic student. Said student, who wore a yellow jersey, didn't take so kindly to being ignored by the new student and stood in front of the Japanese boy. "Hey bitch, you're new around here, so you best learn the rules, Issei." Issei simply grinned. "Whatever, spick." Issei spat in his face. A collective gasp was heard in the hallways, as everyone struggled to comprehend what just happened. "You!" The boy pulled out a switchblade and tried to stab at the Japanese boy, who simply dodged. Issei then grabbed the wrist and twisted it, causing the wannabe gangbanger to drop it. Issei then kicked the legs out from underneath him, before giving a good stomp to the prone boy's face. Issei calmly picked up the switchblade and put it in his backpack before moving through the crowd of parting students. The students were in shock at what happened and a general feeling of pity overcame the boy. Issei thought it was cute that they thought he would be in danger as he walked to his first period class. That's him. Issei knew he was in luck. The same boy he beat up today was part of a gang, the Kings or something like that. Issei didn't bother to learn the names of the gangs, just needed to know who controls what, and who is in charge. He lingered outside of his low-income, subsidized apartment complex, knowing what did earlier in the day had spread quickly around. He saw the bodega store owner give him pitying looks, as well as shifty-looking people occasionally looking his way as he simply sat down on a bench. The sun had long set, and darkness descended on the land. The dim light in front of the apartment complex flickered on and off, but Issei could see the 5 people approaching him. They wore bright yellow shirts, had bandanas on their heads, and unpleasant expressions on their faces. Issei stood up and put his palm up as the 5 Hispanic men approached him. Let's not waste time on pleasantries. I pissed up off and you want my head. Let's just fight, Issei remarked, hitting the largest one with a jab to the stomach and a kick to the kneecap before finishing up with an elbow to the back of the head as he fell down. As the 4 others charged at him with switchblades, he took out the one he confiscated earlier and held it. Ducking underneath the wild swings of a gang member, he plunged his knife into the gangbanger's face. Spinning the screaming gangster around, he took the gangbanger's knife and threw it at another's throat, landing right on target. Pulling his knife out of his second victim's head, he looked at the remaining 2. The 2 were scared, he could see that, but they held their ground. Come on, I'll give you a fighting chance then, he said, dropping his knife and kicking it over towards them. He then rushed at the two, focusing on the one he beat up this morning. Grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back, the gangbanger screamed in pain as Issei cranked it even further. Getting twirled around, the gangbanger was stabbed by his friend as Issei cracked a small smile. Pushing the stabbed gang member to the side, Issei grabbed part of the remaining gang member's throat and pulled back, ripping out part of his throat and spewing blood everywhere. The gang member collapsed to the ground, clutching his throat. Issei just kicked the guy in the head and then stomped on it twice for good measure. Issei took a step back and surveyed his work, before walking back inside his apartment. So, you're the guy who took out the kings? Johnny Matsina said skeptically, looking at the Japanese boy in front of him. Said boy simply nodded as he looked around. Who the hell are you? We've been trying to do that for years and you just show up and take them out? My name is Keisuke Kanehara from Japan. They simply annoyed me, and they had to pay the price, Keisuke said, chuckling. Keisuke had been walking to his house from school when several Italian-American gentlemen approached him. As he ready for a fight, the leader stood to him in a polite way, asking if he would meet their leader. They took him to a crack house on the outskirts of the city and lead him inside to see the boss, Johnny Matsina, also known as Raydog. Raydog was a veteran of the late gang wars of the 80s and is in his 50s now. Though he wasn't as skinny as he once was, he was still formidable as he was in his youth. He's seen many things in his life and knew when someone was telling the truth, or lying. It was a skill he developed while surviving on the hard streets, and something he perfected during the mafia crackdown on crime during the late 90s. He knew the New York City underground crime scene like the back of his hand, so it perplexed him when an unknown player had suddenly popped out of nowhere and killed off his major rivals in the course of a few weeks. He was thankful, of course, but he needed to know if this new player was hostile or not, so he ordered his men to find this new player and bring him to him. What he wasn't expecting was a young Asian teenage boy, dressed in the clothes that characters would wear in that anime stuff his grandchildren watch. He looked at the boy skeptically, up and down before speaking again. So Keisuke, why are you here? He asked politely. He knew when to be polite and when to not be, no need to anger a potential ally in the future. Keisuke simply shrugged before putting on his chin. I moved here to be with my uncle, who is sickly, Keisuke said simply. Raydog looked at him, sensing no hint of deception. And you go to school? I have to, do I not? Why did you kill all of them? They wouldn't let me take their money. Raydog chuckled at Keisuke's response. I like you, kid. I don't say that very often. Raydog stood up and walked around. Keisuke followed him with his eyes as Raydog stared at a painting. It was a painting of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus hanging up on his wall. What do you think about being an associate of us? I refuse. Raydog looked at the boy, who held up a palm. I'm flattered, but I don't work well with others. The boy stood up. But I do think we can come to an understanding. I don't want to be enemies with you. We stay out of each other's way, and we should be fine. As long as I can do what I want, we will be on good terms. And what do you want? Keisuke paused. A small, but sociopathic smile appeared on his face. Johnny unconsciously took a step back. It was a smile he's seen far too often, a smile of the psychopaths and murderers he's crossed paths with in his life. Men with no conscience, men who live for nothing. To see it in someone so young, he shuddered to think of how evil he is. I just want to kill some people. The birthplace of German mythology and location heavily featured in the Grimm's fairy tales, this heavily forested area is lived in by wildlife, hunters, and magicians. Wait, magicians? Hexenacht, a group of stray magicians of mostly German or Nordic heritage, has their headquarters over here. A few hundred meters from the cabin used as the headquarters, Issei strolled down the beaten path. The night of the half-moon was still visible, even underneath the canopy of the trees. The magical presence here was very powerful and pure. He imagined hundreds of years before, witches eating children, and before that, pagans conducting rituals under this very moon. Issei felt the dark, magical aura of the Rathaus, as Walburga called it, getting closer to him. He frankly thought it was a stupid name, as it could not be called Red, nor a house. As he entered the clearing out of the forest, the Rathaus became visible. Surrounded by a gorge with only a rickety suspension bridge hanging over the chasm, the brown cabin stood across from him with the owner of the house standing in front, piercing at him through the darkness. Walburga's golden eyes met his. Welcome, Issei, she said with a cheerful smile, her arms outstretched. Thunder echoed in the background as the night sky suddenly darkened. Issei glanced up before leveling his passive gaze at the woman. We have much to discuss, no? Issei sat across from the German magician, showing no visible reaction to her. The magician told the soulless boy that she needed to get comfortable, for him. Issei honestly expected something like the outfit she wore, a simple and extremely risque black one-piece nightgown. The two sat in silence in the dark room, staring at each other across the narrow table. The interior of the cabin was far more spacious than the outside would suggest, with the only room resembling a castle dining room. "Mao, you're so boring," she pouted, swirling a glass of red wine in her right hand. Issei ignored the outburst, his eyes showing no emotion. "So, the end of the world, you say?" Walburga broke into a smile at his words. Not a regular smile, but a narrow smile that sociopaths would put on. "Say, what do you know about Excalibur?" she asked, sipping some of her wine. Issei paused, recounting the story of Excalibur in his head. The sword of King Arthur, which was shattered and scattered among the Christian churches. Walburga's smile grew even narrower, her eyes glittering. "Rumor has it that some of the fragments were stolen from the factions of the church. Heard whispers that it was the fallen angels." Issei rose his eyebrows at this. I expected the churches to have better security," Issei murmured, taking a sip of his wine. "Not bad, harvested a bit early but aged well." "Any ideas on the culprits?" Walburga giggled. "I don't really know, you'll have to give me something in exchange." "It was your idea to invite me to the end of the world," Issei reminded her flatly. "I did I not?" Walburga put a to her chin, her eyes looking up as if in thought. In a blur, Walburga was placed against the wall, her feet off the floor. Issei had a hand on her throat, his eyes still holding no emotion. Walburga took a sip of her wine from the glass which was still in her hand before looking at his eyes. "Either spit it out, or don't bother me if you don't want to share." "I'm not here to play games, Walburga." All right, put me down." Issei complied, vaguely annoyed at Walburga's coyness. "I don't know, I'm tracking down leads right now." She headed back to her seat. She tapped her on the wooden table. "Ever heard the name Valper Galilei? Deranged priest, human experimentation guy?" Issei sat down. Walburga nodded at his words. "Tracking him down. It isn't a stretch to think that with his holy sword knowledge and excommunication that he would seek shelter with the fallen. And now the Excalibur fragments go missing? Too much of a coincidence." Issei nodded at the German magician's words. He disliked her antics, but could admit that she was very intelligent when the time required. "Let's say all this is true." Issei emphasized the word true. "Then what? How is a little spat between some angels going to kickstart the end of the world?" Walburga wagged her at him, clicking her tongue. "This is only part 1 of 2. The bigger surprise is downstairs." Walburga got up and walked to the wall. Placing her palm on the stone, a blue magical circle expanded, causing that section of the wall to move like a door. A spiral staircase was seen, only illuminated by the torches on the wall. Issei stood up and walked behind Walburga down the stairs. The winding staircase was fit for a medieval castle, ambience and all. At the bottom of the stairs, he heard moaning in the direction that Walburga was walking towards. Moving in the damp darkness, he turned to see numerous people imprisoned behind bars in the dungeons. Most of the people were extremely emaciated and had numerous scars on their bodies. Issei knew of Walburga's hobbies as it was how they met, though Issei liked to think that he put his torturing phase behind him. At the end of the dimly lit hallway stood a metal door. Snapping her, a key appeared into Walburga's free hand, and she inserted it in the keyhole. A blue magical circle pulsed from the lock, and a clicking sound was heard. Walburga pushed the door open and in the darkness the two went. "This, can you see?" she clapped, illuminating the room with torches. In the center of the room was a beautiful girl, held up on a crucifix. She was bound by metal chains, her face hidden by her unkempt blonde hair. Issei narrowed his eyes at the girl. "A vampire?" No way." Issei looked at her incredulously. He focused his eyes, getting a feel for her aura. "Sacred gear. Longinus level?" Walburga couldn't contain her laughter at Issei's words or face. She could only count on one hand the amount of times she has seen him get flustered. "It is the Sephiroth Grail." Issei's eyes widened more than they already were. "The Holy Grail, this vampire has it. The power over the very essence of life," Issei remarked calmly, getting over the shock of another Longinus-class sacred gear here. He looked back at Walburga. "Now I'd ask how you got her, but I really don't want to know." Walburga giggled at his words. "Has she materialized it yet?" Walburga's cat-like grin grew even bigger as she put down her now empty glass of wine. A black magical circle appeared, and in a fog of mist, a golden chalice appeared in her hand. "And so? Here is the Sephiroth Grail. Tada!" She waited around in front of Issei's face. "And? What do you want me to do with it?" "It is already out of her body," I want you to find out the balance breaker and any subspecies of this thing. We know that base Longinus are already powerful, let's see how much more powerful this can get. So what is in it for me? Walburga simply grinned at Issei's question. Depending on what it is, you can have it. Issei paused. He was sure he heard that correctly. His enhanced hearing made sure of that. He is sure that he wasn't in an alternate reality where Walburga isn't a cunning sociopathic woman, and he is sure that he is still sane. He said the only word that came into his mind. What? Walburga laughed out at Issei's dumbstruck face. I say what I mean and I mean what I say. I already have enough power with the Incinerate Anthem, and don't need any more. I am also not going to sell this like you two. Call it giving an old friend a reason to help her end the world. Issei pondered her words. He thought about saying something, but he knew that he would get nowhere with Walburga's constant redirections. Also, she might change her mind about him receiving it, so it was best to act now. Issei remembered the proverb of the gift horse in the inn, shrugged his shoulders. All right. He sighed out. Give me a few hours or so. I'll figure this out. Walburga watched curiously as Issei did his work. She remembered the first time she saw him, that vampire thing in New York. She knew he was the one. His way around the blade made her heart flutter, as did his skill with magic. His magical ability was better than hers, as much as the German hated to admit it. There was something about his magic, it wasn't flashy nor elaborate. It was simple, but simple was all it took to sweep her off her feet. The screams of the vampire in front of her made the magician smile. All of her pain, she relished in seeing others hurt. Whether it be at the point of a blade or with magic, Issei knew how to figure out how something works. Now I think I understand how this plays out. It took a while to sever her link to her sacred gear, but I did it, and found out how this works. Issei spoke for the first time in an hour or so. He turned around, a rare happy smile on his face. In his palm, the Sephiroth Grail floated, suspended in an invisible field that prevented it from succumbing to gravity. The balance breaker of this, it can bring only be used once. Killing yourself, it is the self-sacrifice of Jesus. You die, so that others may live and live forever. The floating chalice became a shining gold as it rotated around. Hundreds upon hundreds of different colored magical circles covered the chalice, each pulsating its color. The subspecies of this, it's magnificent. The chalice started to whirl around, spinning so that it appeared as a blur. From the blur, 2 pieces of the chalice broke off and became suspended in air. The broken pieces started to form into a chalice as the original repaired itself. The magical circles produced a white mist, encircling all of the chalices before fading away. 3 grails. Walburga was speechless at this. Not 1, not 2, but 3. 3 holy grails, each hovering in front of Issei. All of the grails were golden, but each emitted a different color. The one on the left emitted a green light, the middle a black light, and the right a white light. From what I've gathered, this one, Issei said, gesturing to the left grail, has control over the principles of life. Everything about how the soul and life is made, strengths, weaknesses, changes, all inside of here. Going to the middle one, he continued, the control over the principles of death. You can talk with the dead with this, even angels and devils who go to nothingness after their death. Staring blankly at the last one, Walburga couldn't want to hear his explanation. The power over nothingness. The power over the void, that which is either life or death. Issei finished, grabbing the middle and left ones. The right one floated over to Walburga, who grasped it in her hand. Issei still had the kind smile on his face as he walked closer to Walburga. Now I thought it wouldn't be fair for me to have all of it. Issei looked straight into Walburga's eyes. Her heart skipped a beat as he put his face within inches of hers. You never did tell me how all this had to do with stolen Excalibur fragments. Walburga examined the chalice in her hand, a giddy look on her face, before glancing back at the soulless teen. It is quite simple. If the fallen really are behind it, something big must be happening. I say we see what happens and what the fallen plan. Issei thought about her words. They made sense enough, but there was a nagging thought in his head. You do realize this might be a whole lot of nothing, right? It could just be in dealing arms or some idiot losing accountability when taking storage. He glanced at the chalices in both of his hands. Also, I failed to see how the Sephiroth Grail has anything to do with this. It is a gut feeling, trust me. Trust and Walburga don't go together, but Issei continued to listen to her words. And this, she pointed at her chalice and the ones held by Issei. This is power over everything. If this happens to be nothing, we will make it something. If it happens to actually be something, less work for us, right? Issei shrugged his shoulders at Walburga's logic. He cracked a small smile at this. I guess you are right. Anyways, how long will this take? Walburga's eyes became malicious. A sneer became etched on her face. Issei rose his eyebrows at this. Is it that Gremry girl? I don't understand why you'll help her with her raiding game, even though she'll be dead soon. Issei shot a frosty glare at the German. Some of us have a sense of honor. When it suits you, of course. Issei ignored the jab. Truthfully told, I need to see if my strategies work against Phoenix and his regeneration. Sure, having theories on what should work is good, but having a useful guinea pig is even better. And I'm not going to do it myself. He shrugged his shoulders. Walburga simply sighed. Well, I'll contact you when I find out who is behind these thefts. I'll be expecting your call in the underworld then. Issei glanced curiously at the Longinus in his hands. He then looked at the German magician with a face that can only be described as curious. I do wonder what will happen with 2 Longinus-class sacred gears occupying one host. Walburga shot him a nasty look. I'm not your guinea pig. Her angry face immediately turned into a sultry look. Though I can be your... Issei held up his hand, causing the German to pout. We're not going over that again. He sighed. I suppose that I should anchor this to myself. It'll make it much more convenient to use, not to mention more secure. Hundreds of magical circles, each with esoteric symbols in different colors, emerged from the chalices and began to spin around the soulless boy. A gust of wind blew through the dungeon as Issei began trapped within a yellow sphere. The sphere began to pulse and levitate as one chalice disappeared into a pocket dimension that Issei stored all his captured sacred gears. The sphere dissipated and the boy descended back to the ground. Issei rose off the ground and dusted himself off. No matter how many times I've done that, I'll never get used to that feeling, he remarked, looking at his remaining chalice. He felt the bond between the remaining chalice and the other chalice, and both with the nothingness within him. That wasn't the usual way you do it. Or did you just want to brag in front of a pretty girl? Walburga teased. Issei ignored her by giving her a glare. You don't seal a Longinus-class sacred gear the same way you do a twice critical. Walburga giggled hysterically as she rose her chalice up. To the end of the world? She questioned. Issei nodded, another rare smile coming over his face. He rose his remaining chalice and crossed it with the German's. To the end of the world. Issei reviewed the footage of the raiding games that Riser Phoenix had won. The 2 he lost were due to him intentionally losing, so there was no purpose to see why someone lost, only why someone wins. Be it the overwhelming power of Phoenix Fire, tactical brilliance, or the other team simply sucking, Issei needed to know why. Regardless of his views on devils, he made a deal, and he intended on keeping it. He watched the action unfold on the massive television in front of him, as well as the 2 smaller monitors next to the main one. The main one showed the main camera angle, while the others alternated between the secondary views. They allowed a complete view of the raiding game battlefield, showing any strengths or weaknesses. Issei realized that any comprehensive strategy wouldn't be necessary for Rias to win versus Riser. He noticed a theme of Riser's peerage in their fights. Seemingly favoring physical combat, Riser sends all his pieces, excluding himself, his queen, and his bishops onto the main battlefield. The bomb Queen Eubelina acts as a roving figure on the battlefield, allowing for massive amounts of explosive-based magic to be launched at certain locations. His 6 pawns, and 2 rooks, with the support of the queen, go around eliminate their opponents through teamwork, often fighting 2-on-1. It was very pragmatic. Issei could respect that. Whittling down his opponents, he would then join the fray with his 2 bishops and his entire peerage would swarm what was left of the enemies, and take their king. Of course, anyone could see what he was doing, but whether they could stop him was another story. Issei paused the footage in front of him. His head throbbed, a side effect of pairing a Longinus-class sacred gear with his existence. He couldn't anchor it to his soul, which he didn't have, so he paired it with the void that occupied his soul. It wasn't perfect, but it did the job well enough. His skin tingled when he sealed it, as he felt the very nature of his existence morphing within him as the seal became finally complete. He sat down, ignoring the headache. He focused on the task in front of him, staring at the screen as more strategies formed in his head. He needed to take into account the capabilities of the devils in front of him. If any plan he made was to be successful, he could have used the Sephiroth Grail to figure out everyone he wanted to about the Gremry peerage, but that would lead to more questions that Issei would very much prefer not to answer. It would have to be the old-fashioned way of learning. He sat still for 5 minutes, before turning off the TV. He'd be ready to train the devils and lead them to victory. They just have to not suck. Issei impassively stared as the devils conducted their 10 laps around the track in Rias' underworld mansion. Now, there were some trainers who would have started off with something ridiculous like a 10-kilometer run, or several hundred push-ups or squats, but Issei knew better. No purpose in exhausting them at the start of the training. At the end of the training, sure, but never at the start. As the last devil, Asia, completed the lap, Issei couldn't help but wonder how Rias had convinced her to accept Devildom. He was pretty sure that she was just forcefully reincarnated, but he wasn't going to do anything about it, not here nor now. The devils formed in a little group in front of him. Issei looked at the ground as he paced. He was wearing a simple blue track suit with running shoes, much like the devils who wore workout attire. I've formed numerous strategies in my head about what to do about Riser. However, I naturally need to see what you all can actually do before I decide which plan is right for you. He stopped, pointing at Kiba. We are going to spar individually. I need to gauge your abilities and see how they factor into my plan, Issei said. He knew of their perceptions of him as a magician, silently chuckling. There was much more to that they didn't need to know. He would limit himself and fight completely different than he would prefer. It would be no good if your opponents could see your fighting style and your abilities while you had no backup. Let's begin. The two stood across from each other, inside of the grass field of the 400-meter track. The devils were watching from the sidelines, chanting encouragement at the knight. Now, Kiba. Do whatever it takes to neutralize me. I'll do the same. He glanced at Rias. Please start the countdown. Issei focused his eyes back on the blonde in front of him. 3, 2, 1, fight. Kiba charged at Issei at a rate faster than the human eye could see, a western sword materializing in his hand. Issei picked up all of his movements as if Kiba was moving in molasses, noting the distance he had traveled in less than 2 seconds. Raising a palm up, a blue magical circle enveloped the soulless boy, spreading from Issei's feet. Invisible ice covered the circle before disappearing. Kiba rushed into where the circle had been, and his legs came out from underneath him. You're a knight, you rely on speed, he said, as Kiba regained his footing. You know how quickly you'll move in ideal conditions, perfectly warm and sun shining. Issei continued, dodging a slash at his head. Under non-ideal conditions, however, you need to readjust. Ground, snow, quicksand, all he ducked underneath an arc from Kiba's sword. Changed the dynamic of the fight. Issei sprang at Kiba, launching a jab to his stomach and left hook to the face before leaping a safe distance back. Kiba frowned, as the ground started to quake. Issei jumped as numerous blades pierced the earth below him. Good on you, Issei said, falling back down to earth. Numerous magical circles appeared around Issei, each in a different color. When Issei hit the ground, the circles activated. Stony hands grabbed Kiba's ankles with a huge gust of wind, knocking the knight forward to the ground. He couldn't see the stump of earth that formed up in front of his head, and when he collided with it, the force knocked him unconscious. Next, were the last words he heard before the darkness took over. A replay of the fight happened with Kaneko. Issei knew it was going to happen, but just wanted to see if she could defy fate. That is the problem with rooks and knights. All the speed in the world, but no way of hitting a target that wasn't in the immediate vicinity. To his credit though, Kaneko did start lobbing chunks of earth at him as he constantly dodged her punches. Still, it didn't do much for her as she was unconscious on the sidelines. Issei was very curious about his next challenger, the queen. He knew of her heritage. Her fallen angel ability of light would do well in this fight. That said, he wasn't going to tell her he knew what she was. That would have raised more questions than Issei would like to deal with. Begin, Rias shouted. Akino immediately chanted a lightning spell, sending lightning from the sky at Issei. Issei ducked to the side and shot a fireball at her, which he blocked with a barrier. Akino attempted to hit Issei with her lightning, but he kept dodging the attacks. Every attack he dodged, he moved closer to her. When she noticed how close he was, she took to the skies with her devil wings. Her outfit changed, changing from a tracksuit to a Shinto shrine maiden. Issei ignored the change in outfit as he used the wind spell, generating a mini tornado with a green magic circle. Allowing himself to be caught in the tornado, he spun around at breakneck speeds inside as Akino attempted to hit him with a water spout. Leaving at the perfect time, Issei flew out of the tornado as a bullet. Creating an earth hammer, Issei hit Akino out of the sky and into the ground. He launched a lightning spell at the crater Akino fell into, stunning her into unconsciousness. Issei landed on his feet in a kneeling position before he stood up, looking at the Gremrieris. And Rias, it's your turn. Rias launched her signature power of destruction at the soulless boy. Issei watched lazily as the beam of energy made its way towards him. A few inches before it would have made contact, a massive black hole appeared in front of Issei. All the power of destruction went inside the hole before the hole closed up. A fraction of a second later, another hole appeared behind Rias. Power of destruction poured out of the hole and into Rias's back, knocking the heiress to the ground. Rias remained on the ground as the hole closed up, defeated by her own power. Alright, Issei said, walking towards Rias. Let's get you fixed up. Issei made the finishing touches on the 3D modeling software on his computer. The devil sat behind him on 2 couches, eagerly waiting for Issei. Issei hooked up his computer to the TV, the screens a perfect copy of each other. Okay, now that I've evaluated your strengths and techniques against those of Riser and his peerage, this is the best course of action. Please hold off all questions until the end, Issei said, clicking on a file that read Gremory Phoenix Fight Simulator. Out popped a 3D replica of Ko Academy. Zooming in on the Occult Research Club room, 5 white-colored stickman figures became visible, each wearing a labeled shirt with their names on it. Okay, I guess that you will start over here, Issei said, zooming out so that the club building was seen. I estimate that Riser will start in the student council area. Issei zoomed out, pointing at the student council room in the main building. This is what I want you all to do. Issei Siana on that said play. The stick figures labeled Rias and Aquino flew outside while the other 3 stayed indoors. Issei paused the screen. Okay, this is what is going to happen. Aquino and Rias, you will generate a tremendous flood over the battlefield. I want the entire forest and the school submerged in tsunami levels of water, Issei said before he pointed at the 3 other devils. You 3 will start to dig a tunnel from your place to the school building. Issei see on the simulator, and it worked as Issei said. A flood of water became visible, slowly moving over the landscape, while a tunnel was created from the club room to the main building. Issei see on the simulator, pausing it as the flood hit the school. He then scrolled over to the student council building, making visible 16 black stickmen, evidently Riser's peerage. Riser and Ubelina were labeled with their names while everyone else was what piece they were and a number. I imagine that while this is happening, they won't be still. Issei resumed the simulator, making the Riser stickmen move. All the pawns, knights, rooks, and bishops moved. As you can see, Bishop 1 and 2 are moving away from the main area. He pointed out the bishops moving to the edge of the map while the rest of the peerage moved into the forest, which had a wave on top of it. Pawns 1 to 8, knights 1 and 2, and rooks 1 and 2. He paused the simulator, freezing the stickmen at various points in the center of the map. Will be eliminated. He zoomed to Rias and Aquino. You 2 will launch lightning strikes, because you know water conducts electricity. He continued the simulator, as numerous lightning strikes came from Rias and Aquino. Riser's peerage vanished from the simulator as the water crackled with electricity. While this is happening, Issei scrolled underneath the map, revealing a tunnel from the club room to the main building. The Kaneko, Kiba, and Asia stickmen were inside of the main building. Now, it is 5 against 4, realistically 4 against 2. The next threat is the bomb queen, Ubelina. Issei mentioned, zooming in on said stickman. Jack of all trades. Phoenix Fire might be hot and immortal, but shouldn't pose an offensive threat against you. The queen is the real threat. Issei continued the simulator, all the remaining pieces minus the bishops moving around Koa's main building. Issei paused again. Rias and Asia will be on Riser. Rias, you'll engage him with long-distance magic, while Asia will provide support and the occasional potshot at him. Do not, and I repeat, do not get close to him. Issei continued the simulator, zooming in on the moving Riser, Rias, and Asia stickmen. The stickmen were launching spells at each other, with none hitting. Issei scrolled over to the other stickmen. Kaneko and Kiba were engaged in close combat with Ubelina, with Aquino hovering nearby. As you can see, you 3 will gang up on Ubelina. Due to her explosive abilities, I want you to stay close enough to attack her, but far enough from a suicidal explosion should she choose to do that. Resuming the simulation, the peerage watched as the stickmen versions of them continued attacking the Phoenix peerage. All of a suddenly, the simulation popped up a message in flashing red letters, victory. As you can see, this will end in your victory. Your numbers will overwhelm the Phoenix peerage through exhaustion at the end. He turned off the simulation behind him and put his computer into sleep mode. Any questions? Kiba's hand popped up. How do you know that they will move forward? Footage from all of the previous matches shows an aggressive assault built around surrounding and overwhelming with superior numbers. Use that against them. Don't you think they will adjust their strategy when we send a tsunami at them? Rias piped up. Issei put his chin on as he paced in front of the now blank screen. Honestly, no. He seems arrogant enough to deal with water, no matter the amount. It'd sting his pride as a phoenix to be deterred by water. What if he doesn't do this? Aquino asked. I have more contingencies in plan that I will share with Rias. This is the main plan that should be utilized as it is the most efficient use of your energy, Issei remarked simply. So what do we do now then? Train this strategy until the game comes? Rias asked, crossing her arms under her bust. No. Issei waved his hands dismissively. That'd be a waste of time. Knowing the strategy is one thing, being able to do it is another. Your skills are generally lacking. He ignored the sour looks from the peerage. It will be individual skills training for the better part of the month, then group training which will deal specifically with the game at hand. Issei clapped his hands, causing the screen behind him to come back to life. As you can see, here is the schedule of your training. Issei paused to let the peerage see the structured day he prepared. If there are no more questions, you are dismissed. He walked out of the room, but stopped just in front of the doorway. Rest up, you'll need it. Issei watched as Rias and Aquino generated a wave of water far larger than Ko Academy, and sent it crashing into the forest. A vague sense of satisfaction came into his mind, but not enough to show anything. They improved far more than he would have expected. Over the course of the month, they've proven themselves to be hard workers and immensely skilled as well. Rias and Aquino's magical reserves have gone up tremendously. Kiba became even better at sword fighting, Kaneko got stronger, and Asia isn't totally useless anymore. The devils proved themselves to him during the training, and to him, they'd been upgraded from the scum of the earth to bugs. A small improvement, but an improvement nonetheless. Now, Rias shouted as they both generated large amounts of lightning and threw them down at the pool of water. The electricity crackled as it hit the water, causing sparks to become visible. My work here is done, Issei muttered to himself, grudgingly impressed. It went exactly as he planned. He knew it would. Riser Phoenix and his peerage were just too inflexible to change to the tactics he taught Rias. Their frontal assault plan became their downfall when they lost nearly 70% of their pieces just with the tidal wave. The Gremry peerage impressed him with the speed at which they built their tunnel underneath the school. Getting caught off guard didn't hinder Riser as much as he thought it would, and he saw that the Phoenix had some skill with fire. There were several key takeaways the soulless boy got from the fight with Eubelina and Riser. The king and queen were both highly skilled, but had endurance issues. They rely heavily on Phoenix tears to heal damage inflicted on them. Isolating them deprives them of their teamwork. In the end, it was Aquino and Rias whittling down Riser's endurance after Eubelina blew herself up, taking along Kiba, Kaneko, and Asia. The two devils alternated elemental attacks on the Phoenix. When one used water, the other used lightning. Chunks of earth were combined with blades of wind. Rias used her famed power of destruction well on Riser, hitting him from all directions. Issei found the weakness of the Phoenix from the video of the raiding game. While having close to absolute regeneration, it doesn't matter if you are exhausted and can barely fight. Riser sighed, panting for air. Surrender. Issei paused the tape at that point. A buzzing of his phone caught his attention. Funny how fate decides to act. Walburga. Took you long enough, he said flatly. The German magician simply groaned. I'd start off with a hello, how are you? I've been fine, thank you for asking about how my day was as well. Whatever, just tell me the news, Issei remarked, not caring about the magician's words. Mao, can't you at least pretend to care? She pouted. I don't need pretenses with you, Walburga. We both know what the other wants. No need for useless pleasantries. All right. Walburga huffed. It took a while, but I have a lead. She paused for a few moments. Say, what do you know of the Angel of the Stars, Kokabeel? Mentioned in the Book of Enoch as one of the Watchers who fell from heaven, the Grigori. Name rings a bell. One of the few remaining 10 winged fallen who survived the Great War. Walburga confirmed Issei's words. All the information I have leads back to him. They weren't willing to talk to a pretty girl at first, but then they told me everything. Issei knew exactly what that meant. Somewhere in some dingy place, there was something severely tortured, he was sure of it. I'm not going to ask who, but I believe you. That's the trust I've been waiting for. How does Valper fit in with Kokabeel then? Issei asked. He's working with him. Probably trying to rebuild the Excalibur. Issei followed along with Walburga's words. Makes sense. There are capable swordsmen in the fallen angel. Tobioicus comes to mind, but I doubt Azazel would let him wield something blatantly stolen. That begs the question, he's rogue? Kokabeel is definitely rogue. I doubt Azazel, Barakiel, or Shemhazai know of his little side project. Interesting. Issei simply remarked, all of this information adding to the various scenarios he thought of. They wouldn't approve, of course. Azazel is too much of a researcher, Shemhazai is too busy keeping Azazel in check, and Barakiel, who knows about him anymore? That was the intelligence of Walburga that made Issei respect her. There is also one more thing which ties all of this to a bigger picture. Walburga paused for a dramatic effect. Valper was last seen north of Kuo. That was the piece of the puzzle that Issei was waiting for. I think I understand it. Kokabil the warmonger from the Great War, Valper the disgraced mad scientist, and stolen Excalibur fragments. Walburga laughed. You see it too? It is very obvious. Issei chuckled. It'd be a poor detective show if anyone planned it like this. Stolen Excalibur fragments in a devil's territory. Not just any devil, 2 devils who are related to the underworld government. Issei paused. He's gonna kill them and leave the fragments behind. Walburga burst out laughing. The devils will call for blood, the angels get the blame. Tensions escalate if war doesn't break out right, and then the fallen get involved. Boom, Great War revived. Walburga hysterically chuckled on the other end of the conversation. It gets even better, she said before gasps of air. Issei imagined the magician rolling on the ground from laughter. How so? The church is sending exorcists to retrieve the fragments. I can see how one international incident is preferable to a full-scale war breaking out. Got any ideas on who they are sending? Griselda Corta? The fossil strata? Issei asked. No, just 2 unremarkable exorcists. Issei could tell that wasn't a joke. They definitely want war to break out then. Not necessarily. Too strong of a force could be seen as too aggressive to the devils. That is true. Issei agreed. But it doesn't seem like they are trying hard enough to retrieve them. Do they really think 2 exorcists can deal with Kokabil, the Excalibur, and his army of minions? I don't, and they are fooling themselves if they think that. Issei pondered on that for a moment before continuing to speak. It's plausible deniability. They look like they tried but failed to stop war, and they have to fight it. Can't have the paragons of self-righteousness up there look like bloodthirsty savages, can they? They cannot. Walburga remarked. Got any information on these exorcists? They are both female, trained by the church. Each is from a different faction, and each has a remaining Excalibur fragment that their church gave them. Interesting. Issei nodded along. Any information on when they are due to arrive? Shortly. Their flight lands on Wednesday. I can send all the information on them if you want. Thanks, Walburga, you're the best. Issei said, vaguely sarcastic at that. He was thankful that Walburga was good with technology as well, and the information she sends will save him time. You always know how to make a girl blush. She giggled out. Usual place. With that, the line disconnected. A few minutes later, an email appeared in one of Issei's email accounts. Clicking on Walburga's email, he opened the 3-page attachment. It was a dossier on a blue-haired girl, as the picture displayed. Issei read over her information before scrolling down. His eyes widened slightly. Irina Shidu. He said the name as if it was unfamiliar. He glanced at the picture. She had grown definitely, but that face was definitely that of his childhood friend. His broke into a wide smile. He was genuinely happy won't be the correct word for the way he was feeling at that point. I've been meaning to thank you for making me the man I am today. I guess we'll be meeting soon, that I thought. It was too easy, it really was. Issei wondered if it was a trap, or something along those lines. He couldn't feel any other angelic or church-related presences nearby, but still proceeded with caution. He didn't think they were dumb enough to dress like that. Cloaks with hoods covering their heads are greatly noticeable in the crowded market. It made his job easier though, so he didn't complain. The barrier he chose to use was in place, so it wouldn't be hard to go all out. The devils would be dead soon enough, as would the exorcists, so it wouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. All right, he looked around, seeing all of the people in there without a care in the world. He paused, feeling a vague sense of disgust. The veneer will soon be pulled off. Putting his hands in his pockets, a yellow magical circle appeared over the crowded shopping district. Hundreds of light spears rained down from the sky, causing people to scream out in fear. The light spears impaled the shoppers, young and old, without mercy. Those who managed to dodge the initial massacre were chased down by light spears that seemed to be able to hone in on them like a guided missile. When the screaming died down to gasps and cries for help, Issei saw the 2 exorcists now facing him, their swords out. Issei looked at them, their hoods now off of their heads, a small bitter smile creeping onto his face. Irina Shidu, Zenobia Corda. I've been expecting you. The 2 stared at him, hatred and shock at his actions. Who are you? Zenobia shouted, pointing her sword at him. Issei tilted his head at the sword, and then leveled his gaze at the blue-haired exorcist. My name is Issei Hayadu. Name ring a bell, Irina? He threw a quick glance at the brunette. Her scrunched her eyebrows. Issei, how could you do all this? She shouted, also point her sword at the soulless boy. He saw the blue-haired exorcist shoot her friend a quick glance before leveling her sight back on the soulless boy. Issei simply shrugged. They were in the way. I wanted to talk with you personally, is that so bad? He stared down at the bodies crying out in pain near him. Raising a palm up, dozens of fireballs shot out, incinerating anyone who was still alive. The two exorcists gaped, seeing the emotionless way the boy had just killed at least 15 people. What happened to you? Are you a devil now? Issei shook his head at his former friend's words. Devils? I'm honestly offended that you think of me as so low as to become a devil. No, I'm human, a better human if I might add, Issei said, turning his head towards the direction of Ko Academy. Now, let's get straight to the point here. I know what you are here for, you're here to retrieve the Excalibur fragments. A small, cynical smile appeared on Issei's face. But you won't make it, you're gonna die here. Kokabeel is trying to start a war with the stolen fragments by killing the two heiresses and you won't stop him. I won't let you, he said calmly. Zenobia looks ready to tear Issei apart, while Irina has an angry look on her face. What do you get from this? Why are you helping him start another war? Issei remained calm at Irina's outburst. Kokabeel's a useful idiot, but he'll be useful in the upcoming war. As for why I'm helping him, I just want to see the end of the world. He looked again at the direction of Ko Academy, and then back at the two exorcists. Both exorcists were shooting him deathly glares. I see your friend is getting a little restless, Irina. Let's get started then. Issei's face turned stoic. You, the church, and your god. That set her off. Zenobia charged at Issei, intent on using her sword to separate Issei's head from his shoulders. Or at least that is what she tried to do if she wasn't sliced to pieces when she dashed no more than 2 feet from her original position. Blood spouted out from her body as chunks of her flesh slid to the ground. Zenobia. Irina turned her head around so quickly that it might have given her whiplash, but at the moment she didn't care. Issei stood in the same spot he was at, an uncaring expression on his face. Flexing the fist that was in front of him, he unfurled his and hundreds of extremely thin wires became visible to the remaining, angry exorcist. You see, unlike you, I don't talk just to hear the sound of my own voice. While you were busy expelling oxygen, I was actually doing something productive. Raising up his other hand, he unfurled it, and another set of wires became visible. Irina's eyes widened as she realized that these wires had encircled her body, preventing her from moving. Issei walked up to her, not minding the hateful scowl his former friend was giving him. Don't worry, you aren't going to die now. It wouldn't be fitting of my former friend, the one who set me on the path to becoming the man I am today, to die such an undignified death. That was the last Irina heard before electricity coursed through her body. Her muscles tensed as the shock began to set in. After 3 agonizing seconds, the graceful release of unconsciousness took over. When Irina woke up, she realized that she wasn't on the ground. Her arms were outstretched to her side, her entire body resting on a piece of wood. She opened her eyes, seeing her former friend reading a book. That book looked familiar to her. Ah, you're awake. I was wondering how long it would take you, didn't want you to miss the show, Issei said calmly, closing the book and putting it on his chair. It was the book you gave me all those years ago, the Bible. It still has the funny message you wrote before you had to leave for England. She tried to speak, but couldn't. Issei simply nodded, a small grin on his face. Ah, the reason you can't talk is because I cast a spell on you. I'd normal sever your vocal cords, but time is of the essence, he remarked as the ground shook under him. Fitting, you will die like Jesus did. Bound to a wooden cross, and powerless as you watch the world go to shit again. You gave it your best shot, Tiger, now watch this. A small, bubbly circle rose up from Issei's hand. The bubble held up a moving image of Ko Academy. The exorcists could see the devils fighting a 10-winged fallen angel. You know of who they are. They won't last, but you know of that, didn't you? War is going to happen, and did you really think you two were going to stop it? Issei's face became condescendingly sweet as he read his former friend's thoughts. You two? Really, you thought you two could simply take back a bunch of stolen fragments from a cadre-level fallen angel? Do you understand how stupid you sound right now? Issei asked, watching the battle unfold on in front of him. Issei saw Valper's dead body in the background as Kiba wielded a sword. Rias, Sona, Aquino, and Tsubaki were launching magical attacks at the fallen angel who just laughed. God is dead, Kokabeel said from the screen. Irina cried out, but no words came from her. Issei simply rose his eyebrows. That's where God was the whole time. Makes sense. Issei threw an incredulous glance at the exorcist. Honestly, no, he isn't. I mean, if God was loving and all-knowing, why did he let his angels fall, his humans sin? Why did he not stop anything? It's either he left, really doesn't care, or died. Although watching 99% of humanity exist would make me want to leave or blow my brains out as well, Issei chuckled. You can believe whatever the hell you want, you're going up there soon enough. No, I'm not going to torture you. You were my friend, but more importantly, you were the one set me on this path. Issei picked up the Bible lying on his seat, came forth, 2 she-bears out of the woods and tore 42 of the youths. That's the thing that inspired me to look into magic. You know where that is from? Issei nodded. 2 Kings 2:24. One of my favorite passages regardless of it getting me where I am today. Issei looked lazily at the sky, where a massive light spear was forming. The spear was easily the size of Ko Academy. You know, I really do think that he is compensating for something down there, Issei lazily remarked as the spear was thrown. Issei turned his attention back to the screen as a small tremor shook Ko. When the dust settled, Ko Academy was no more, having been reduced to rubble. The bodies of the devils littered the former school grounds, and that is how the apocalypse will start. Issei lifted a palm as a yellow magical circle appeared. A small light spear shot out, stabbing his friend in the head. A large magical circle appeared under him, but before disappearing, Issei looked at the corpse of his childhood friend. Goodbye, old friend. The port of New York and New Jersey. The third largest in the United States and the largest one on the eastern seaboard. Thousands of tons of cargo are moved from the massive S to warehouses, where they are then shipped to bustling metropolises up and down the coast. All types of goods enter here, some more legally than others. The latest makeup products from South Korea, carpets from the Middle East, drugs from Colombia, weapons from South America, all flow through this port, with the latter 2 flowing through one specific warehouse on the docks. Warehouse 17. Owned by a shell company operated by an organized crime syndicate in Colombia, this warehouse is vital to the flow of drugs and arms to the streets of New York. Unfortunately, being owned by an enemy of Issei Hayate's employer means that those who are currently in and around said warehouse must be eliminated, by any means necessary as specified by Mafia Capo Gianni Mazzini. Issei peered down the sights of a suppressed sniper rifle from a nearby building. He could have used his magic, sure, but he thought he needed to keep up with his firearms skills, so firearms it was tonight. Also, extensive use of magic would have been a lot harder to explain to his employer, so firearms serve another purpose in that regard. 2 birds with 1 stone, he shrugged. He'd use magic, just not as his primary weapon. There were 3 people patrolling in front of the entrance, all 3 packing assault rifles. Issei chanted a simple vision spell, allowing him to see inside the warehouse. He saw 24 others in the warehouse, all moving about, some with weapons, some without. Focusing back on the 3 outside, he went left to right. The first hit the ground with a shot to the upper, the second with a shot to the stomach, the last without part of his face. Putting the rifle over his shoulder, he jumped down from the building, landing perfectly on his 2 feet. While a 50-foot drop would break a person's legs, Issei's enhanced body withstood the impact without any injury. Picking up an AK-47 assault rifle from one of the dead guards and ammo from all 3, he made his way into the warehouse. He slinged the assault rifle over his shoulder and pulled out his silenced handgun, holding it in front of him as he made his way down a corridor. Taking out the 2 at the end of the dim hallway with a shot to the head, he moved past their bodies and into the main part of the warehouse. He crouched behind a crate and let his magic see how many were still in there. 18 remaining. Several of them had left in trucks just as he came in. He shrugged his shoulders as the information came into his mind. 4 near the rafters, 4 on the catwalks above him, the rest of them on the ground floor with him. An idea popped into his head as he surveyed the people with his eyes. Unslinging his AK-47, he took out the magazine and dumped all the bullets out. Now, that caused a bit of noise as 30 bullets fell onto the concrete floor and everyone knew that something was up. Issei heard shotguns being pumped and hammers cocked as the last bullet fell to the ground. People began to shout and yell and move about as Issei focused on everyone in the building. Whoever you are, come out now! Issei smirked as he pinned down the new locations of everyone left in warehouse. Alright, prepare to what the foo. He would have finished, if a 7.62x 39mm round didn't lodge itself into his skull. The thugs whimpered and yelled out as they saw bullets levitating in midair before flying full speed at them. The unknown caused bullets to fly around indiscriminately the warehouse as they fell to the floor. Issei waited for the screams to die down before sending another mental scan of the area. 18 bodies on the floor, most with 1 gunshot wound to the head, but some had a second one to the back. At least they had some sense to try and run, not that it would have gotten them far, of course. Issei emerged from behind the crate and calmly walked over the bodies as he made his way to a table. Stuffing some of the neatly banded stacks of money into his pocket, he then saw a custom red Desert Eagle lying on the table. Examining the handgun, he smiled as he put that into his waistband. It was a nice piece that Issei recognized, and it wasn't like the people here needed it anymore. Just before he walked out of an open door on the other side of the warehouse, he muttered a spell. The warehouse instantly smelled of gasoline before turning into a full-on fire because of a small flame shot from the of his. Issei knew it was cliché, but he didn't look back at the building on fire as he walked away from it. He thought it was something out of a shitty crime novel, but there it was in front of him. A vampire crime family. A mafia where the members were all vampires or people who will become vampires. His boss sent him to take out the Romanians, so he should have expected something from the people whose country produced Dracula. He admitted that their human trafficking business was interesting though. Kidnap girls for their blood, an eternal blood bag for their consumption. They hid their tracks well, gathering girls that society forgot about, the homeless and the drifters who no one shed a tear for. These vampires were smart, though it wouldn't matter for much longer. Said vampires were all glaring at him as he held a handgun in his right hand. A small smile crept up onto his face. You know, I don't have to restrain myself. You aren't human, and you definitely won't be found vampires. I'll have some fun, I guess. Issei leveled the barrel of the gun at the ground as he materialized a short dagger in his other hand. The vampires all rushed at him, their sharp nails and teeth bared. Bang! Bang bang! The one to his left was shot in the twice and once in the head. Twisting his body around to avoid a bite, he leveled the gun at the kneecaps of a vampire as another one snuck up behind him. Issei slashed diagonally, separating her head from her shoulders. What the is this? The second vampire shouted in agony. Bullets weren't supposed to hurt them, not like that. Issei smirked as he tossed the dagger at a short male vampire. The blade nailed the vampire's head against the wall before flying back into Issei's hand. Let's just say it is a special mixture I designed myself. Thanks for confirming it works. Issei levitated the wounded vampire's body and exploded it, sending chunks of flesh everywhere. The vampire that remained had gathered the sense to pick up weapons now. Issei passively looked on as crowbars, bricks, and stacks of money were thrown at him. Forcing them all to the ground, a magical circle appeared in the palm of Issei's hand. The circle became a sphere, and spun rapidly as it turned from black to white before turning to a faint red. A vampire's fawn was violently ripped out, and flew towards the center of the spinning red sphere. Sanctify la malédiction chez ce du mal. The sphere fizzled out. The vampire smirked. Your big spell fizzled out, Nai? Issei shook his head. Nope, they exploded. The remaining vampires' bodies simply exploded, leaving nothing but legs. Issei was protected from the splattered flesh with a simple barrier, which he took down after confirming their deaths. It worked perfectly. Issei walked over at the corner of the room and saw the laptop monitor which the vampires had left open. Sitting down and typing away at the keyboard, he found the financial records of the vampires. A few more clicks, his overseas bank accounts suddenly became significantly larger. Issei rose his eyebrows as 15 well-dressed men and women suddenly appeared from black cars and surrounded him. Issei sighed, knowing exactly who they were. Ugh, vampires? You killed one of us. The vampire stopped, collapsing to his knees. The others followed suit, grasping their as Issei stepped on them to get out of the circle. Have fun with those heart attacks. Issei's eyebrow twitched. A slight feeling of annoyance came over him as more vampires stood in front of him. I'm getting real tired of this now. Issei rose up his index as the vampires charged. As if he was swiping on a phone, Issei swiped right. Sickening cracks were heard as the vampires' necks snapped, their heads torqued in unnatural directions. Only one stood, knees bent inward at the sight. Issei noticed the trickle down the remaining one's pants and would have commented, but he was in no mood for light talk. You know, you're going to tell me everything you know. Let's just do this the hard way since I am a bit upset. Issei spoke perfectly calm as he glanced towards a nearby brick wall. The last thing the vampire felt was flying sideways before hitting his head into something solid. Oh, is that blood? Feeling comfortable? Issei patted the chained vampire to an iron crucifix. His caressed the scalpel, which he let drag along the skin of the unfortunate vampire. The bound and gagged vampire cried out behind the gag, with the knife singeing his skin. Oh, this. It's special steel, made especially for hurting you people. I added a little mixture to it to make it especially potent. He looked at the blade and then at the vampire's bear. Let's get started. You will tell me who you work for. Issei poked and prodded all over the vampire's body, flaying the skin to the very nerve. Using magic, he healed the vampire, before restarting at another body part. Take an agonizingly long time as he peeled the skin back from the vampire's left leg. The vampire whimpered. Issei removed the vampire's gag, a knowing smile on his face. He was impressed at this vampire's resistance to his mental attacks, but like everyone else before him, there was a physical breaking point. Ready to talk? Rosalind Carmilla. Issei's face scrunched up. A vague look of disgust appeared on his face. That's a female-dominated vampire group from old Transylvania. What kind of man willingly submits to a woman? Issei sighed while shaking his head. Without warning, Issei plunged the knife straight into the vampire's heart. He was about to retract the knife when he felt a very small presence observing him. It wasn't hostile, but it was very well hidden. You can come out now, he said, letting some of his power flare out. After a few seconds, a large mirror became visible in the distance. Issei watched as a girl became visible within it, and eventually walked through the mirror. He observed her, a girl slightly older than him in a gothic Lolita dress. He noted her magical reserves which were greater than his. The girl had an unnerving smile on her face, causing Issei to mentally prepare spells just in case she decided to attack him. The girl giggled, a laugh that contained a large amount of malice in it. Issei simply stared at the girl. How do you know I was there? I didn't. Your presence was very well hidden from me until the end. I must say, I would have seen through many people's observation spell. The girl laughed. I'm not many people then, aren't I? No, not much of a talker are you? Issei stared at the girl. Alright then, I'll start. My name is Walburga. Walburga, he'd remember that. Alright Walburga, what do you want? Not even going to tell a girl your name? Keisuke Kanehara. The girl had a sour look on her face at that. Your real name. Issei said nothing at his alias being seen through. Walburga put a hand on her hip and sighed. You would have fooled me if I was lesser. Your posture was perfect, and your heartbeat normal, but something just seemed off. Your eyes betrayed you. Issei shrugged his shoulders at those words. He thought he did well. Alright, you got me. My real name is Issei Hayadu. So, what do you want? I wanted that vampire. She giggled, glancing at the knife plunged into the vampire's heart. Licking her, she narrowed her eyes. Issei subconsciously took a step back at this action. But now I want you. Issei materialized out of his magic circle, instantly feeling a pointy spear directed at his head. Issei didn't even blink as he felt the other presences in his hideout. What did you do? Chow Chow hissed out. Issei adopted a neutral face as he moved the spear with two. The spear resumed its position as Issei sighed. Issei's eyes darted to Walburga and the back of Herals and Siegfried. You're going to have to be more specific than that, Issei replied calmly. Chow Chow continued his cold glare at him. You know what I'm talking about. The two devil heiresses die and you didn't stop them? Oh, it is my job to babysit devils? Last I checked, I don't have that job description. You know this will start a major war, right? Issei smiled. Chow Chow pointed his spear downward, his free hand running through his black hair. Naturally. Issei fought the urge to roll his eyes. Isn't that what you want? Chow Chow turned to the Japanese boy. What? You heard me. I'm not a monster unlike you. I value humanity, and we know how that is working out for you. Issei shrugged his shoulders and walked over to take a seat on the nearby leather couch. Chow Chow stood in front of him, his arms crossed against his shoulders. You can be as angry as you want at me, but isn't this what you want? You can deny it as much as you want, but you have an inferiority complex. Your ancestor was an imperial chancellor and a king in ancient China, fighting in many battles throughout his life. Issei's neutral face turned into one of sneering contempt. His eyes went up and down the Chinese youth's body before resting on his face. You, on the other hand, playing cowboys and Indians with your little group, you're no more than cosplayers with fancier weapons and larger egos. Clang! Issei parried Chow Chow's spear thrust with a sword that he levitated from a nearby table. Don't be upset that I told you the truth. Be grateful I gave you the chance to surpass your ancestor, he said calmly, unfazed that his occasional associate tried to punch a hole in his head with the spear that killed Jesus Christ. You want me to be grateful that you started a war? Issei rose his eyebrows at Chow Chow's loud voice. He placed a palm up as his flattened. Frankly, I don't care if you are grateful or not. You'll thank me in the future when your name is plastered in the history books, out of the shadow of your namesake. You can be that leader of humanity, as you always wished. Chow Chow's glare lessened at him. Chow Chow turned his head towards Heracles and Siegfried, motioning them to stand beside him. Turning back to Issei now, he maintained a frosty look at the soulless magician. Walburga moved to be closer to the group now, eager to hear what was going to happen next. So, what are you going to do next? Chow Chow asked, the words slowly coming out of his. I have an idea, but it will require Leonardo. Where is he? Issei asked. He's currently with George and Jean, gathering our forces together. Issei let out a small sigh, putting his hands in his pocket. Glancing at Walburga and then at Chow Chow, he nodded. No matter, that can work later. Before I tell you, are you on our side? I'm on the side of humanity and justice, Chow Chow said without hesitating. So self-righteous. Issei ignored the snort from Heracles. I'll take that as a yes, however. Anyways, we are going to drag everyone into this little war. And how do you plan on doing that? Issei moved his eyes towards Walburga. You'll find out. Issei flashed a smile as a golden magical circle appeared underneath Walburga and himself. The circle engulfed the two in a bright flash of light, sending them away. You could have given me warning, you know. Issei ignored her words while surveying the surroundings. The air in the forest they were in radiated of pureness, an untouched expanse of nature around them. A mountain stood intimidatingly in front of them, its mass far surpassing that of both of them. Where are we? She asked. At the base of Mount Smolikas in Greece. And why did we teleport here? Say, what do you know of the Titans? They were the proto-gods of the Greeks before being overthrown by the Olympians. They were imprisoned after their downfall. Walburga's eyes widened in realization. We are going to free them. We are going to free one of them. Issei materialized one of his parts of the Sephiroth Grail. Its green hue pulsed a bit before simmering around the chalice. Life. I learned a lot about this from the historical records. Rebirth, resurrection. Issei examined the chalice, a faint look of interest on his face. Change. He looked at the base of the mountain again. The lore was quite vague on what change was. Changing a man to a bird, changing a god to a man, it doesn't say. The voices in here say a lot of things as well, but nothing beats seeing it in action. Let's test it out. Then what are we going to do? You have a Titan turned whatever, and then what? Still looking at the mountain, Issei responded to her words. Let it loose on the world as a devil. Get them more reason to fight it out. They're all prepping for war, holding emergency meetings, summoning back all forces. The thing is, we need to pull other factions in. He spoke, holding up his free hand. A blue ball of light appeared before red rings appeared around it, each rotating and spinning constantly. Hundreds of Greek letters etched themselves onto the red rings, becoming visible as yellow scribbles. Hidden ruler of what was yours, rise again, Issei spoke, the words automatically translating to archaic Greek. A small tremor erupted as the ball of light shot out of his hand and flew towards the mountain. Phasing through the mountain, the tremors became stronger and more violent before a loud boom was heard. Walburga's eyes widened as the mountain crumbled in front of them. The two became acutely aware of something that stood where the mountain once did, but they couldn't clearly see due to the dust in the way. His name is Iapetus, the father of Prometheus. The dust settled, leaving a 50-foot giant with gray, wrinkly skin in front of them. The giant's face was completely wrinkled like that of an old tired man, with his large clouded eyes staring off into the distance. His body was extremely thin, with his legs being no more than twigs. If he was human, he may have suffered from malnutrition in his life. Get ready, the giant roared, flexing his arms. A resounding crack echoed throughout the air as the giant jumped. Just bind him, it'll be a lot easier to change him if he isn't flailing about, Issei said simply. Walburga nodded, chanting in Old German. Barely visible rope appeared on the giant's arms, legs, and neck. He was pulled back and slammed into the ground with a massive thud. The Sephiroth Grail pulsed rapidly, changing from black to green and back numerous times. Issei focused some of his magical reserves in, giving the Longinus the power it needed. A wave of green energy radiated outwards from the cup, forming up into a sphere which inside was a queen chess piece. The sphere flew at the chained, screaming giant, sinking through the skin. The screams intensified as Issei felt the Titan's life force change. The struggle within was extremely strong, with the Titan's life force violently clashing against the artificial devil piece. The back and forth violently shook the Sephiroth Grail as Issei focused more of his power into Grail. The struggle shifted, with the devil life force overtaking the Titan's natural one. Issei motioned for Walburga to release the bindings, which she did. The Titan slowly rose to its feet, using its hands to steady itself. Do you feel it too? It's quite amazing that it can do that. Issei shrugged as the Titan got back to its feet. You'll never completely erase what something is, but you can overpower it. A blue magical circle appeared underneath the Titan devil, teleporting him away from the two. Where did you send it? He chuckled at Walburga's question. Let's just say that someone is going to get a nice little surprise in 10 minutes. Chow Chow, Siegfried, and Heracles sat on one couch, while Issei and Walburga sat on the other. Well, technically that was true, but it didn't make Issei any less annoyed as Walburga sat on his lap. In front of them, a glassy panel appeared levitated in front of them. It displayed an image of Rome, bustling with tourists within the walls of the Vatican. Here we go. Issei snapped his. The body of the Titan plopped down in S Square in Vatican City, sending crowds of people running in panic at the giant that just fell from the sky. The Titan stood up, roaring and stomping on anyone who was too petrified to move. Scooping up a handful of bloody corpses, the Titan summoned his and chewed, sending a sickening cracking sound through the air, before lobbing bodies at the Swiss guards, who came onto the scene. Say. Chow Chow's words echoed throughout the dark room, but Issei kept his eyes on the screen. Why a Titan out of all things? And how do you know he was there? Issei mused over the question as the Titan grabbed the obelisk in the middle of the square, and hurled at a group of guards. The weapons of the Swiss guards, both the ceremonial halberd and modern MP5 submachine guns, failed at bringing down the giant. The Greeks don't really like their break in case of the end of the world toys being used by anyone other than themselves, especially by a faction they have decent relations with. The Titan swung its fist at the dome of S Basilica, sending stone tumbling down onto tourists. I've been around the world. Finding things is what I do, Issei said as the Titan leapt into the sky, spreading out its body as it came back down to earth. The belly flop destroyed the rest of the basilica, sending a new layer of dust everywhere. Time for the little puppet to end its performance, Issei said, a small red magical circle appearing in the palm of his hand. A hissing sound was heard as a single whisper of smoke came from the circle before the circle disappeared. Back on the floating magical screen, the Titan's eyes flashed red momentarily before fading back to gray. The Titan snarled and frothing at the as it crouched before leaping hundreds of feet into the sky. Maddening spell? Siegfried asked. Issei shook his head. Actually no. Negative feeling spell. Though they were locked up before Christianity took over and though the Greek worship of Olympus was fading long before the Christians came, a lot of Greek gods still resent the Christians for taking their followers. Their hate and hatred is now firmly with him, Issei said, as the Titan landed on the Apostolic Palace. Crushing some of the Raphael rooms, the Titan bull rushed the papal apartments. Windmilling its arms and flailing its feet, the Titan wrecked the buildings nearby as an insatiable bloodlust came over it. Angels came into view, their wings unfurled and light spears at the ready. Dozens of 4- and 6-wing angels hurled spears at the rampaging Titan, which just kicked in the Vatican library. The spears bounced off the Titan's skin as it barreled into the Capella Paulina, a nearby chapel. When did you enhance it? A Titan shouldn't have immunity from light-based weapons, and definitely not devils, Wahlberg asked. Issei tilted his head at the German. The devil chess piece was modified, added in light resistance, Issei said as the Titan sprinted, before coming to a full stop. Standing straight up and ignoring the barrage of light spears at him, his curled into sneer as he plunged a fist into the ground. Raising his fist up from the crater he created, the silhouette of a man could be seen in the Titan's grasp. The Pope, Siegfried said, no emotion in his voice. Issei nodded, raising its fist so that all the angels could see the Pope struggling in his grasp. The Titan maliciously smiled. The angels halted their light spears, lest they hit the Pope. Hardening its smile, the Titan suddenly crushed the Pope, letting his limp body fall back down to the earth. A wave of negative intent was unleashed as the angels rained down millions of light spears at it. Everyone was speechless at the sudden turn of events, except Issei. Chow Chow slowly turned his head towards the Japanese boy, who maintained a slight smile. So, the devils will attack the angels for the Excalibur fragments even though it was Kokabeel. The angels will attack the devils in retaliation. The Greeks get blamed for the Vatican attack, and the fallen angel attack the other two and maybe the Greeks? Yep, Issei said simply. Alright, let's. Chow Chow stopped as a bright green magical circle appeared in the room. Issei turned to see George and Leonardo walk towards them, Issei standing up to meet them. George, welcome. Leonardo. George smiled, shaking Issei's hand. Issei and George respected each other's magical abilities, leading to a bit of a rivalry between the two magicians. Leonardo simply nodded as Chow Chow stood up. Are they gathered? A nod answered Chow Chow's question. Chow Chow, do you mind if Leonardo helps me with something? Issei asked, materializing one chalice of the Sephiroth Grail in his hand. George and Leonardo's eyes widened at the sight of another Longinus. 5 Longinus-class sacred gears in possession of some of the most dangerous humans in the world. What a sight to see. I do not mind. That being said, it is up to Leonardo. Leonardo? A nod caused a slight smile on Issei's face. What exactly do you plan on doing? The smile turned into a wider, slightly evil smile. We're gonna break into the S part of hell. Pardon? The Chinese youth asked as Issei repeated. You heard me, we are going to break into hell. The goal is to reach Malbolge. Chow Chow's eyes furrowed in recollection. The place of those who have committed the greatest sin. Chow Chow mused out loud. Any particular reason in particular? Frankenstein. The holiest unholy abomination. Annihilation maker and the Sephiroth Grail. The power of creation and the power of rebirth. Chow Chow nodded his head, slowly understanding what Issei was getting at. You want to free the souls of Malbolge and implant them into Leonardo's monsters? Exactly. This is very versatile. Issei held up his chalice and rotated it. But it can't free trapped souls. Same applies for heaven, believe me, I tried. Chow Chow placed it on his chin. Very interesting thought. However, why all that effort? Why not revive something like the Hydras or perhaps the evil dragons? We can't find the souls of the evil dragons, Walburga chimed in. Chow Chow rose an eyebrow at her as she continued. Their souls weren't in the dimensional gap or any of the voids I've looked through. If they were hidden so well that I couldn't find them. In addition, Issei spoke again. This isn't guaranteed to work. We need to start small, and if it works, then we can look for the evil dragons and the Hydras. Besides, if it doesn't work, the devils have another problem to deal with in addition to the fallen and the angels. Understandable, they'll have to contain those souls, lest they reach the human world. Chow Chow admitted. One thing though. Issei rose his eyebrows at the Chinese youth. What? Chow Chow cracked a small smile. I want in. Chow Chow waited as Issei prepared himself for the journey to hell. He looked at a topographic map of hell, noting the easy entry points and the places that would be the least guarded. With the hostilities rising, he expected more patrols, evidently to prevent angels from coming through. Ready. Issei's voice caused Chow Chow to raise his head slightly up. Issei was dressed in a pure black, form-fitting battle suit, with a sword slung over his back. Any particular reason you have that already out? Issei shrugged. I enhanced it with Sephiroth Grail to deal with any particularly troublesome souls and didn't feel like opening up the pocket dimension to put it back. Speaking of the Grail, do you want any or any of you want enhancements? Issei asked, materializing the Sephiroth Grail in his left hand. Sure, I don't mind an additional speed boost or further resistance to Hell's flames. Leonardo, Heracles, Chow Chow said as the chalice grew a faint purple tint around it, which drifted to the Chinese boy. Chow Chow let the purple tint encircle him, flexing and rearing his head back. Ah, much better. He looked at the others. Leonardo shook his head while Heracles crossed his arms over his. I don't need anything else, I'm great right now. Issei rose his eyebrows at Heracles' boast. I thought you'd need something down there. Heracles' face turned a bright red as he got in the soulless boy's face. Picking him up by the collar, the hero screamed at his face. Why you? Being flung back by telekinesis, Heracles skidded to a stop, murder in his eyes. Issei simply dusted himself off, not a care in the world at the aura Heracles oozed. Heracles continued glaring at Issei before calming down at Chow Chow's behest. Leonardo stared at the soulless boy before speaking, a rarity for him. You don't need? Issei chuckled. He doesn't know? Issei asked Chow Chow, who shook his head. Leonardo rose an eyebrow as Issei crouched down to eye level with him. I've already reached the pinnacle of humanity already. I've enhanced myself far before I attained the Grail through training and mastery of my body. For everything else, I use spells. What he is saying is that he's given up his humanity. Issei stood up and shot Chow Chow a neutral look. I surpassed humanity by whatever means it took. Call it whatever you want to though. Chow Chow picked an interesting way to reach the underworld, Issei pondered as the group of four trudged their way a swampy, sledge-like part of hell between Malbolge and the rest of the underworld. The air filled of stale death, as the swampy valley they were in seemed to stretch on for infinity. Why Chow Chow chose that area to land in when they could have entered through the realm of the dead and ventured from there is something Issei filed in the back of his mind to ask. Later, this part of the underworld was claimed by no faction, so it made sense in Issei's mind, but he still thought it would have been easier to enter through Hades' realm. The nameless void they were in soon gave way to the entrance to Malbolge, an eerie silence in the air. A tall arch was visible, the entranceway to the prison Malbolge. What most people think of as hell, while generally false, is represented in Malbolge. An eternal place of torture, the souls of the truly wicked are bound to a medieval fortress prison, reveling in their pain with no respite. Issei stopped, looking at the inscription on the arch. Pape Satan Alep? A small smile appeared on his face. Dante's Inferno was one of the works of literature that weren't complete crap. Chow Chow stood next to the boy, staring up as well. The oath many have taken to give themselves into darkness, he said grimly. And what is the answer? Issei asked. Chow Chow smirked, knowing the answer. Raphael Mek Zabi Almi. Raphael extinguishes the darkness of the original sin of man in the first language. Chow Chow recited as the gates of the prison opened up slowly, the squeaking ringing throughout the underworld. The fluttering of wings, beating louder as the four entered the gates of the prison. Rows upon rows of cells with bars trapping vestiges of souls behind them, all on one floor in the foreseeable distance. The fluttering of wings stopped as the guards came. There were 12 of them, the defenders of the souls of Malbolge. They were the stereotypical depiction of demons in the group, with the others being human. "Who are you?" A hoarse voice erupted from the leader, a 2-meter-tall blue demon with 5 hours on his head. The demon pointed his trident at the intruders. "Malakota, leader of the Malbranche. Pleased to make your acquaintance. I am Chow Chow and these are my followers." "That is Issei Hayadu," Chow Chow said, materializing his true Longinus. Malakota snorted, signaling his devils to charge. Pushing 3 short goblin-like demons back with telekinesis, Issei shredded them with a hail of icicles created with holy water. They screamed out as blood flowed out from their wounds before being put out of their misery with a tremendous explosion. Looking out of the corner of his eye, Issei saw 3 demons being devoured by Leonardo's monsters and Heracles smashing 4 devils into each other, making them splatter into blood. Chow Chow locked his spear against Malakota's trident after killing the second-in-command, Barbaricia. Extending his spear, the spear stabbed through the stomach as Malakota was consumed in a flash of light. When the light subsided, the upper half of Malakota's body was gone, leaving only a part of legs in its wake. "That was easier than I expected," Chow Chow remarked, a slight hinge of sadness in his voice. "Everyone okay?" Everyone nodded at Issei's question. "Good," Issei said, looking at the seemingly endless row of cells in the prison. "Leonardo, are you ready?" Issei continued, materializing his Sephiroth growl. The boy nodded as shadows began to form underneath his feet. "Can you make them mannequin-like?" "A humanoid figure is without a doubt more familiar to them." A nod answered Issei's question. Issei chanted a simple Hindu soul release spell, a green sphere hovering over his grail. A green sphere lazily hovered over to the nearest cell, moving excitedly once inside. The sphere erupted with a gray ghostly visage, which shot into a shadow underneath Leonardo's feet. The shadow expanded, turning into the shadow of a man which then stood up from the ground. The figure was featureless as if it was a tall, black mannequin. The mannequin moved, hitting the wall nearby. It then started to flail around wildly, causing Issei to sigh as he blasted it away with fire spell. Issei glanced at Leonardo. "Just a prototype, we'll get it right," he sighed. "Can you add eyes and a?" Leonardo nodded, more shadows forming underneath his feet. Issei freed another soul, which shot into a standing mannequin. The man stood upright, blinking its eyes at the 4 humans in front of it. "Can you speak?" Issei asked. The mannequin's all-white eyes unnerved Leonardo, who stood behind Chow Chow for protection. "Yes?" the mannequin said in a male voice, as if questioning its own existence. "Do you remember your name?" The mannequin stood still, its head looking all around. "Cesare Borgia." Chow Chow's eyes widened. "Italian dictator from the early Renaissance." "Yes." Issei shot a quick look at Chow Chow, a smile on his face. "It works. They retain knowledge of themselves," he said, looking at the mannequin which housed Cesare Borgia's soul. "You are free to go, bound soul," Issei said as the mannequin wandered past them and towards the gates. Watching the mannequin exit, Issei turned back to his companions. "So we know that it works. I suppose the search for the evil dragons or hydras can be put on our radar." Issei looked around. "Let's give the devils another problem while they are here. Leonardo, can you more mannequins, but add a pair of wings and another pair of arms to them? I'm going to enhance them as well." Leonardo nodded at Issei's request. "Letting hell break loose?" "Yep." The soldiers of the 20 Royal Guard Regiment rushed towards Malbolge prison at top speed. 5 minutes passed since the alert sounded. Someone had dared to break into the prison. Major Masalkar Shax, 3rd son of one of the Shax branch families, led the formation of 500 devils to intercept those assaulting the prison. Sighing underneath his full-face helmet, "This has to happen now." Mobilizing all the forces, and now this? What's the world coming to? He couldn't believe what he was seeing as the regiment flew over the prison. Blending into the dark ground, these black, sledge-like mannequin monsters ran around. There were at least several tens of thousands of them, each armed with some type of weapon such as a sword or a mace. Squinting his eyes, he saw the souls of the tortured in there. "Men!" He held up his hand to get the attention of his troops. "Kill all of these things, whatever they are. Leave no survivors." With a roar, his men swooped down, their spears set to kill anything in their path. The black mannequins roared back, leaping into the air and taking flight with their wings. Major Shax descended, landing on the ground as he planned to take out a majority of them in one swoop. Major Shax opened a magical circle in front of him. The shack's family insignia prominent on the purple circle. The circle gathered energy from the surroundings as it grew bigger. Pulse eruption, he shouted, launching his family's signature decapitating wave of energy. A thin, gray, nearly invisible, wave of air shot out, bisecting many of the mannequins. Shack smirked, watching their torsos fall to the ground as the magical circle disappeared. His elation was short-lived as the torsos oozed out black goo, which formed a path back to their legs. Slinking back up to their bodies and reattaching themselves, the mannequins charged at the Major. Observing from afar, the humans watched the battle with a slight interest. I've heard many things about this Shax. A unremarkable son from a weak branch, Chow Chow mused, eyes slightly widening at the torrent of flames from Miskala's Shax at the mob of mannequins. Chow Chow turned to a smirking Issei. I knew that elemental and magical resistance with durability was a great thing to add to them. They're effectively immortal. Can't wait to use one as a punching bag, Heracles added. Steady yourself, Heracles. There will be a time and place for this, and now is not the time, Chow Chow stated as a tremendous blast occurred in the area. Glancing over at the destruction after the light died down, Issei hummed as the mannequins reformed their bodies. Furrowing his eyebrows, he tried to sense the energy signatures of Major Shax or his devils. Chow Chow was also in thought at the sudden explosion. Do you sense them? They've all disappeared? Issei asked Chow Chow. The Chinese youth shook his head. I don't sense any of them, and I didn't detect anything like a magical circle. Chow Chow was confused. Was that explosion a self-sacrifice of some sort? Issei nodded at this, on his chin. Maybe he tried to take them all with him as he was getting overwhelmed. Very well could be, Chow Chow remarked. He could have lived to fight another day, telling others of what he saw. These devils, so prideful, Issei sighed out. Creating a gray magical circle underneath them, Issei spared one last look at the battlefield, a slight smirk on his face. Our work here is done. The prototypes have passed the test. Traveling back to the surface, Issei reclined on a couch at their safe house. In the tundra of Siberia, the sparsely populated stretch of the Russian plain was a perfect place to hide out. Chow Chow, Heracles, George, and others from the hero faction sparred amongst each other in the corner, while Berga typed away at her computer, observing events around the world from her mole monitors. It was peaceful, Issei thought, musing over the death and destruction happening throughout the world. Assassination of Rias Gremory, Sona Citri, and their peerages. The Excalibur fragments being there. The Pope being crushed to death by a Greek end-of-times creature in front of the entire world. The releasing of those in Malbolge prison and the successful combination of Annihilation Maker and the Sephiroth Grail. Issei pondered his place in the ever-growing smaller world. Was he going too fast? Was he hoping for too much? Was the end not going to happen? He shook those thoughts out of his head. Everything takes time, he assured himself. All the three factions were full on mobilizing now. Recalling all of their forces would take time, but there will be some strikes whenever possible. It was weird to him, to feel anxiousness. No, that wasn't the right word. Fear? Definitely not. Catharsis? Issei paused. Pondering on that, he nodded internally. That could be it. Catharsis. He likes the sound of that. As Issei pondered the meaning of life on the couch, while Berga watched her monitors with a morbid fascination, her attention directed at the large monitors around and above her, she watched as the world went up in flames. Her screens had live footage from all around the world. America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, South America, Africa, each on a different monitor, playing out graphically for her to watch. People turning against other people. Riots, mob violence, all at call and beckoning of the three factions. People dragging priests out of churches and beating them to death. Groups of people lynching suspected demons in revenge for the death of the Pope. Buildings on fire as hordes of people rushed out with stolen goods. Gunfights being heavily armed groups and police forces on the streets of first world countries. She smiled. Introduce a little chaos, kill a well-respected leader, and have the veil of ignorance lifted off people with the supernatural being real, and they all turn on each other. End-of-times groups killing themselves en masse, proclaiming that the end is nigh. Well, they are right about that. A massive explosion dragged her attention to the far-right monitor on the top corner. Well, Paris was nice when it lasted. Kokobile laughed as he flung the priest at the pulpit. It's happening, all of it is happening. The Great War getting restarted. Grabbing a priest who dared to attack him as he was in thought, he squeezed the priest's head, causing it to pop like a balloon. Kokobile straightened up as he felt a new presence in the room. He sneered, turning around to Vasco Strata standing by some overturned pews. His red eyes glared at the former exorcist, who looked back at the fallen angel with a stoic face. We met, oh what was it now? 73 years since then? Vasco asked, surveying the area with a look of disgust. Same place too. How fate brought us back to Notre Dame in France, he mused, taking out his Durandal replica and pointing it at the fallen angel. Coquebille materialized 2 light spears in his hands, beckoning the former exorcist to come at him. Let's finish what we started all those years ago. In an old, abandoned castle in the Belial territory of the underworld, 2 devils talked about the state of the world. One of them, a handsome man with gray hair, reclined in a chair as he sipped on red wine. Yes, so we've made contact with the Belial, Abaddon, and Belphegor families. We are still trying to reach the other namesakes, Euclid Lucifuge stated as Rizavim hummed before waving his hand. Don't bother, those kids are doing their own thing anyways and wouldn't believe that I am back. Rizavim sipped on his wine before looking back at Euclid. How did they react when you told them? Euclid rose his eyebrow at this. Diehauser was happy, while Bediz and Roygun didn't display any emotion. Always like that, Diehauser. Alright then, have you heard back from the spy in the palace? Euclid grinned at this. Yes, something interesting has happened. A coup, so to speak. Rizavim opened his in shock, setting his glass of wine down. Do tell. Well, Ajuka Beelzebub has been imprisoned. In the bowels of the dungeons below the Satan's palace in Lilith, Ajuka stared at the darkness in front of him. How did it come to this? He asked himself as he recalled the events of that evening. He knew that Serafal and Serzex wouldn't take it well, but he didn't expect that. He paused, turning his head towards the bars that shut down his magical abilities. Wincing in pain at the injuries he received, he thought about the bond between siblings. Serafal dearly loved her sister, as did Serzex love Rias. Even Falbium, though that lazy bastard wouldn't admit it, loved that delinquent of a brother. Him though, what was Diodora to him? Someone with the same biological father and mother, someone who grew up in the same household as him. The age gap was too great, he didn't know how Serafal and Serzex did it, but more importantly, his brother and him didn't have anything in common. Him a Satan, with the studies on his mind. His brother, a liability for the carnal knowledge due to his nun fetish. He furrowed his brows in frustration. This wasn't something that he could test nor quantify, greatly upsetting the man of science. Ajuka thought back to their faces of despair. He hadn't seen Serzex or Serafal that angry since the Civil War long ago, and it was a memory he wanted to forget. Rationality goes out the window at the death of a loved one. For normal beings, of course. He wondered what he would feel if his father, mother, or brother died. Would he be sad? He mused the answer to that as he remembered the Kankara formula going up against Serzex's power of destruction and Serafal's Celsius cross trigger. There was no use in fighting them, especially not together. He wasn't sure if he could beat Serzex alone, but Serzex and Serafal, he knew a lost fight when he saw it. Falbium knew it, and joined the two, but Ajuka held no ill will against him for it. War was going to happen, whether he liked it or not. Now he sat in this little cell, alone for the time being. He knew that they would come to their senses and release him as he is needed for this war. Closing his eyes, he started to meditate. Meanwhile in heaven, a handsome figure in majestic armor crouched down by a massive glass tube, which held a ball of the purest light possible. The figure stood up, and paced around the otherwise empty field. Is this what you wanted, Father? Michael asked, glancing at the sacred gear system. The ball of light remained static, causing Michael to chuckle. I knew it was foolish, Father. I'm here talking to your relic, wishing that you would come back. We're all so lonely, all so lost without your guidance, he said, looking at the system once again. Is this the right path? The path to salvation of the humans and of the earth? You sacrificed yourself in the war, Father. Now the war will happen again. What is peace but a temporary reprieve from war? Michael asked himself. The ball of light shone ever so brighter, which Michael noticed. Father? The ball returned to its normal color, causing Michael to frown. I expected too much. You aren't coming back, are you? I will finish what you started, Father. I will use the weapon you created but didn't use in the last war, Father. With those words, Michael left the seventh heaven in a cross of light. Azazel stood solemnly in a small cemetery in northern Japan. The gray night sky produced a bit of drizzle over them, with a cool wind from the west blowing their clothes a bit. His eyes were from crying along with Barakil. His friend was hit hardest, Azazel knew. He'd be in the same way if it happened to him. His wife, the mother of his child, dead. And now his children. Azazel looked at Barakil, who kneeled in front of headstone. Speaking for the first time in a few minutes, Barakil's voice was that of a broken man. I couldn't save her, Shuri. Just like I couldn't save you. I'm sorry. Azazel's heart sank at this. Akino Himejima, killed by Kokabeel. He knew it, Shemhazai knew it, Barakil knew it. That's what hurt the most to the leaders of the Grigori. They knew Kokobil wanted war, but they never expected him to do anything like that. Their brother, killing someone he considered a daughter, stung Azazel's heart. Azazel clenched his fists, cursing himself. Vala was too late, but he knew it wasn't his fault. Barachil stood up, and turned to Azazel. Azazel saw his blood-red eyes as Barachil walked past him. Waiting a few moments as the rain poured down, Azazel turned around to follow him out of the cemetery. Vala flexed his muscles in his armor. It's time for the end. He smiled. The world was getting too boring. Now, if he could only find the Red Dragon Emperor. Hades laughed, and laughed, and laughed. His creepy chuckle echoed throughout the realm of the dead. Ho, it is finally happening. The skeleton moved, his empty eye sockets drilling into his most trusted Grim Reaper. Pluto, Hades' voice boomed. The clown mask-wearing Grim Reaper said nothing. Ready the pale horses and Samuel. I feel that our heroes may need it. In the void of the dimensional gap, Ophis stared out into the vast nothingness. Turning her head slightly, she gazed. Looking at a translucent mirror, Ophis focused on the boy lounging on the couch. Her gaze lingered on the soulless boy, her a slight smirk. You will help me get rid of Great Red. A flashing pop-up message popped on one of Walburga's monitors, making her slightly irritated as the stream was showing a group of soldiers shooting at fleeing civilians. The title of the message made Walburga raise her eyebrows and she spun around in her chair, calling for the soulless boy to come over. Yes? Issei asked, glancing at each of the monitors. That. Walburga pointed at the monitor with the message. Mass movement of church materials to centralized facility. Issei looks vaguely surprised as he glanced at Walburga. I have a contact who owes me a favor, Walburga said, giggling. Chow Chow and the hero faction came over to look at the screen as well. Church materials? Chow Chow asked. Moving them to a centralized facility in case of an outbreak of hostilities. Why not teleport them to heaven? Walburga shook her head. These materials are heavy magic proofed, so no magic can be used to transport them, or even get near them. Chow Chow rose his eyebrows at this, slowly nodding his head. What kind of materials are these anyways? George asked. Walburga grinned like a cat, waiting for that question to be asked. Church artifacts. Powerful weapons and scrolls, such as the staff of Moses and Aaron's rod among others. Chow Chow gasped as Issei became interested in the items that casted the 10 plagues on Egyptian being in his possession. And there is another thing. They are very close to us. Only an hour away as they are in Siberia as well, Walburga stated. Issei cracked a smile at this and turned towards everyone else. Well, what are we waiting for then? Issei asked. Serial grumbled as the wind blasted his body from the northwest. Even as an angel, he still hated the cold with a passion, though it doesn't affect him as evidently as it did some of the exorcists working in front of him. He sighed, looking at the barren wasteland the humans called the Siberian tundra in the Russian Federation. He wondered why he was stated to supervise the movement of materials by his brother Michael and not any of the lower-ranking angels. He'd do it, as evident as being here, but he wasn't happy about it. He crossed his arms, thinking the entire thing excessive. This repository, only used in the end of times, was created after the Great War and no one but the Seraphs knew of it. Not even the Grigori cadre knew about it, and if they didn't know about it, the devils and others wouldn't know about it. He paused from his thoughts, looking in the distance. Squinting his eyes, he was suddenly thrown back by an unseen force. TCH, I hate it when something happens. Taking to the skies with his 10 wings, hundreds of magical circles littered the frozen tundra. Hundreds of humans appeared, causing him some degree of shock. He felt that they all had sacred gears, but more alarming than that was the presence of 5 Longinus sacred gear users. Continue working, Serial yelled, as his workers stopped loading the crates onto the plane. Turning his attention back to the new humans, he observed those who stepped forward. Seraph, pleased to make your acquaintance, a human with the true Longinus shouted. Serial recognized the 5 Longinus sacred gears, but only 4 of them. George, Leonardo, Walburga, Chow Chow, and looking at the 5th one, the wielder of the Sephiroth Grail, only saw a boy with light brown hair. My name is Serial, one of the Seraphs of God in heaven. Leave this area immediately and I shall spare you, Serial stated. There was no malice behind his words, only the truth of what would happen if they followed his instructions. He felt him magnanimous in this respect. He'd give them a chance to live, and if they didn't take it, it wasn't his fault. The unknown boy stepped up, a chalice in each of his hands. Serial searched his memories for this boy's name, but it escaped him. The angel was sure that the Sephiroth Grail's possessor was a damper, but there it was in front of his eyes, the Grails. There was a certain confidence on the boy's face as he began to speak. Cut the bullshit, angel. God's dead, I know it. Kokabeel boasted about it. The boy boasted. Serial's demeanor turned serious, with the gears in his head turning quickly at the revelation that these humans knew the truth. Serial's normally pleasant face turned into a sneer as he stared down the nameless boy down. And you believe the word of the tainted star of God? The boy looked on, impassively. My name is Issei Hayadu. The tainted star of God had no reason to lie. And if he were lying, where is the big man himself? Here we are kicking over the hornet's nest and about to start the next great war, and yet the big man is MIA, sipping margaritas on a beach in Spain. Where else would he be then? Serial's anger flared at the boy's words. But seriously. Issei spun around a chalice. The big man talks through this. Serial paused, staring at the chalice he held in his hand. He's disappointed in you angels, wondering where the hell did he up. A smile appeared on Issei's face. He's left the world to us, the way it was meant to be. We're just doing what God should have done years ago, kill you angels, devils, and fallen. With his words, a tremendous ball of fire shot out from the chalice, missing the seraph greatly. The seraph created hundreds of light spears, raining them down carefully as to not hit his workers. Issei rushed the seraph, cruising through the air at a high rate of speed, generating several thousand pebbles. Issei launched them at the seraph, who dodged the projectiles but was hit by a lightning spell from the dimension-lost user. The seraph gritted his teeth. He's been through worse. A 5-on-1 shouldn't be too bad. Michael waited for the last of the seraph to appear in the seventh heaven. All the seraph, minus Serial, were assembled in front of him, buzzing about the reason the archangel brought them to an isolated part of where their father used to live. A cross of light flashed in the seventh heaven, revealing the angel ninja Metatron. This was urgent, Metatron, you're late. Metatron acknowledged with a bow as Michael ordered him to rise. Turning to face the group of seraph assembled before him, he spoke. You might be wondering why I've called you into the seventh heaven today. Michael gestured towards a large, almost translucent door behind him. Looking grim, the archangel continued, we are on the edge of war. The devils think we killed the two heiresses, and all communication to the underworld has been cut off. As such, we need to assume the worst. That is why I ordered us into a state of emergency. Holding a palm up, a small magical circle appeared. With Enochian symbols etched through it, the circle flew at the door, glowing as the door turned into a white door and opened. The archangel walked inside, followed by the rest of the seraphim into a completely white room. At the end of the room, there stood a contraption the likes never seen by all but one of the angels currently in that room. It was a glass tube, standing well over 10 meters tall and easily over 3 meters wide. Inside it, a series of gears, easily numbering over 1,000, interlocking with each other in perfect stillness. Walking over to it, Michael placed his palm on it. The tube emitted a white pulse, instantly changing the feeling of the room. Father? Gabriel cried out. Michael shook his head. This was the last vestige of our father. Shortly before his death, he took me inside here, Michael said solemnly as the seraphim watched him with wide eyes. They have never seen their leader like this. He told me of what this machine you see in front of you is. Michael paced around in front of the machine, a weapon to change the tide of any war. Everyone became confused at his words. Several angels gasped, realizing the ramifications of his words. He infused parts of his essence in here. He told me this weapon, which he called his hand, has unfathomable power. He told me he was going to use it to turn the devils back to Lilith, and wipe out the fallen before he died. Michael paused for an uncomfortably long time before resuming his speech. His last, dying wish, was for me to use it. To finish the Great War once and for all. I was a coward then. Michael looked away from his fellow angels. I suppose we all were then. He continued. I couldn't do it. I couldn't use the last memory of him to finish a war that caused so much death and destruction. His last vestige on a war that tore us apart. So I disobeyed his will. For that, I am sorry and for hiding this from all of you. Michael bowed his head, much to the shock of the other angels. Their brother and leader, submitting to them? It was unfathomable. Brother, stand up. Gabriel's voice caused Michael to rise up. You have nothing to be sorry for. If we were in your position, knowing the immense pressure you face now, we would have done the same thing, Raphael assured. Gabriel looked at the other angels, seeing their expressions and emotions, before turning back to her brother Michael. This weapon, the last will and testament of our father. How exactly does it work? Gabriel asked, running her hand along the glass exterior. It is powered by our grace, our power. A seraphim can use it effectively, but combining the efforts of all angels in heaven, it is much more powerful, Michael answered. A few seraphim murmured before being silenced by Uriel. Where are we going to use this on first? he asked. Michael frowned at this. I was unsure. That is why I called upon all of you. There are numerous targets that hold strategic importance for the Fallen and the Devils. I wanted to discuss which target should we use this on first. Because once this is used, the Fallen and Devils will assault our gates. The presence of such a powerful weapon will immediately be a target that they will seek to silence. Gabriel looked at Uriel, and they nodded at each other. Very well, I have an idea. Sariel spat out blood. Everything hurt. His wings, he didn't know how it happened, but the fire from the incinerate anthem burnt them to a crisp. He was getting tired, fighting the illusions created by the Annihilation Maker. Those black monsters were endless, reforming after his spears of light destroyed their essence. The true Longinus wielder and the Sephiroth Grail wielder were formidable opponents in close-quarter combat. Chow chow, such precise and refined technique with the spear that pierced the skin of the Christ. The other one, Issei Hayato, such a wild and unorthodox style, yet so efficient and straightforward. They were fast, created after images of themselves as they struck his body with their fists, legs, spear or sword. Sariel gritted his teeth, noting that his arm was feeling lighter than normal. Oh, it was broken. Everything felt slow, his movements, his reactions. His breath sped up as his vision narrowed, focusing on the disappearing humans in front of him. The dimension-lost wielder sealed off the area. There was no chance for him escaping. There was no hope for escape, no glimmer of rescue. Sariel had a bitter smile on his face, which was soon punched by Issei. Why won't you die? Issei asked. The angel heard no malice in his voice, only a questioning evil. He was enjoying it, ever so slightly. This is how the angel would die. A survivor from the civil war caused by Lucifer, to die at the hand of 5 humans. No. He resolved himself to go out on his own terms. A surge of power came over his body. His last will and resolve to take down his enemy to the afterlife, wherever that was for angels. I'm taking you with me. The angel screeched, his body coated with a pure white glimmer. The coat pulsed, sending out waves into the surrounding area. Rapid thumping was heard, as if a heart was about to burst. He's gonna blow, Issei yelled out, rushing away from the explosive angel. Sariel followed them, a smile on his face as he would soon see his father. George! Take us out of here but seal him in. Walburga, help him, Chow Chow yelled, flying near Issei as they flew through the brisk air. The 2 magicians nodded, with hundreds of different colored magical circles appeared all around them. The circles flew out, surrounding the angel and holding him in place high above the ground. As the light began to show from the cracks of the angel's skin, a purple miasma formed around the angel, completely enveloping him. A protective sphere formed from the miasma, as a tremendous explosion was heard. The sphere expanded immensely, showing cracks in its outer layer before subsiding. Descending back down to the ground, Issei and Chow Chow rejoined the rest of the Longinus users. Let's take our weapons where they belong, shall we? Walburga grinned. All across heaven, angels were frantically working. Under orders from the seraphim, they were in high alert, ready and waiting for the orders to descend to the earth to fight and make their way into hell. A buzzing, static sound was heard by all the angels in heaven, alarming them as this method of communication was last used in the Great War. They snapped to attention for word of the seraphs, brothers and sisters of the heavenly host. Michael's voice echoed throughout heaven. Lend us your power, for we are going to strike at the very heart of our enemies. Many eyebrows were risen at Michael's tone, with solemn but fiery the best way to explain it. Letting the power of their grace flow from their bodies, the power of the angels flowed into the 7th heaven, where Michael and the seraphim were standing. The room radiated with the power of the heavenly host as the seraphim absorbed it. Clasping hands together in a circle around the hand, the seraphim closed their eyes before chanting in a language unknown to man and most angels. The language before time and space, the language of God. Filling the room with esoteric sounds, the machine whirred up, with the gears moving at an extremely rapid pace. The tube filled up with an extreme white light, pulsing brighter and brighter as the words flowed from the seraphim. As the words stopped flowing, Michael opened his eyes while placing his hands on the machine. A tremendous bang echoed throughout heaven as the angels wondered what happened. Opening his eyes, a small green dragon looked up at the sky. He was at Dragon Mountain in the underworld, searching for a dragon apple to eat. Not finding one, the dragon lounged against a barren tree and closed his eyes. He opened his eyes, to see the sky split and whirl around as if in a maelstrom. Looking on with wide eyes, the dragon saw white colors dance around the maelstrom in the sky, gathering size rapidly. Ominous rumbling echoed throughout the area, causing panic in the young dragon. Sensing danger, he flapped his wings as a brilliant beam of light shot from the sky and obliterated Dragon Mountain. The last thing the dragon saw was white, before nothingness. Issei paused, a quiet rumbling in his ears. The humans were holed up in a safe house in the underworld after stealing the weapons from the church. It wasn't easy to undo all the protective seals on the equipment, but George Wahlberga and himself managed to do that and transport the weapons to a more secure location in the underworld. The secure location being an old abandoned military fortress from the time of the civil war between the devils, all those years ago. Issei looked around, seeing everyone else stop and pause. The sound continued at a low rumble, as the humans exchanged curious looks at each other. Guys! You better come take a look at this. A guard busted through the door, getting the attention of all in the room. Hustling outside, the humans were astonished to see a massive beam of light shoot down from the skies. Squinted eyes stared at the brilliant beam of light, taking precautions to not blind themselves due to the sheer brightness of the light, which began to die down after a few long seconds. What the hell was that? Someone asked the question that was on everyone's mind. A faint energy overcame the area, coating everyone in a heavy aura. So, something holy? Issei asked aloud. Definitely angelic in nature. Maybe it was that beam of light's after effects? Chow Chow remarked as Issei nodded. Everyone started to flow back into the fortress, leaving only Chow Chow, Issei, and Wahlberga outside. They looked in the direction of the light, not saying anything for a few moments. A jolt was felt by Wahlberga and Issei at the same time, causing both of them to stare at each other. Did you? Yeah. Looking at both of them, the Chinese youth spoke. What? What happened? He asked as Wahlberga materialized her chalice, causing the soulless boy to do the same. It feels like there are a few new inhabitants in the world beyond, Issei said with a frown as he looked in the direction of the light. Say Chow Chow, isn't that the direction of where a lot of the dragons live? Chow Chow frowned, his head in thought. Slowly nodding his head, he squinted his eyes in the direction where the light was. Now that you mention it, yes. Dragon Mountain was in that area, and would be anything of note in that particular area, beside a few insignificant towns. Issei sighed, looking at the other humans assembled there. Alright, let's just hold. Everyone! He shouted, alerting most of the humans at large. See what the lore says. Also, keep an eye out on the fallen. They might know what it is. Meanwhile at the Grigori base, Azazel clutched his. Azazel! Lord Azazel! Master Azazel! He heard their cries of worry as he felt his heart beat at such a fast rate. He saw Shemhazai shaking him, Barakil's concern etched in his face, Penemu's tears rolling down her face. Hand! Azazel squeaked out, his eyes out wide. Everyone stopped at this, lending their ear to their leader. Azazel took a breath at this, fighting the pain in his heart. Hand of God. With these words, Azazel fell into sleep. Shemhazai walked around, his hand on his chin. With his leader unable to act, it was up to him to lead the Grigori. What was that flash of light? What were the angels planning? What did Azazel mean by God hand? What does it all mean? Barakil is right there with him, fretting around with worry. Barakil? He couldn't hear, his worry clouding his mind. Barakil? He felt someone violently shake his shoulders. It was Penemu. Yes? She looks pissed, causing Shemhazai to gulp. He's awake, go towards him. He nodded, entering the room where his leader was holed up in. There he was, in front of his eyes, Azazel, looking as weak as a baby angel. Shemhazai. Azazel turned his gaze on said angel, before turning his gaze a bit to the left. Barakil. Shemhazai acknowledged the third in command of the Grigori fallen as Azazel continued. I have something to tell you. Something that I should have told you a long time ago. The two fallen angels leaned in, eager and yet slightly fearful to hear the word of their leader. They've never seen him like this, so weak, so hopeless. Rumors. I've heard rumors. Rumors of a weapon of such great power. The one caused by the biblical God himself, the God of Adam and Eve, my father, a weapon of unimaginable power. Issei read, his tracing the Enochian text of the Book of the Beginning, a journal by the fallen angel Lucifer, also known as Satan. All the other humans were gathered around the ancient tomb, following along as Issei spoke the words written on the angelic script. Brother Michael has kept it hidden from the rest of the host. From Raphael, Gabriel, and even me. But I found out. He won't tell, nor would Father. But I found out what it was. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the written word of the fallen seraph, nigh archangel. A weapon that harnesses us, his children and their powers. Our essence, our graces, ourselves. Something that can obliterate those what, or who disobey his word. He should use it against those sinners in Eden, if you asked me. Issei closed the tomb, looking at everyone who was in the room with him. His eyes heavy, he stared at everyone with an extremely serious expression on his face. Do you understand what this means? Silence. Silence echoed through the room. It is God's holy nuke. God's laser from heaven in case shit really goes down south. Everyone grumbled at this. They speculated among themselves before a clap resounded throughout the room, causing them all to shut their s at once. Now, what I propose will help us in our goals. Issei paced around, waving it in the air as he shook his head. We should take his weapon and use it. Use the holy nuke. It's our destiny. Issei materialized the chalice in his right hand, raising it triumphantly among the humans, his other hand clasped against his. God told me so, we are the true ones to inherit the world, his future. Everyone paused, not sure if they heard correctly. Some looked on incredulously, others with fear in their heart. Others simply looked on. A clap. A single clap echoed throughout the room, then another, and then another. Soon, 5 claps echoed throughout the room. The room was deafened by the tsunami of claps. Issei paused, a smile creeping on his face. It is time. Everyone became silent at his word, eager to hear what he had to say. We use the hand of God to carve our future. Who's with me? The humans cheered to a better future. A future without monsters, without devils, without angels. A future of man by man for man. The day has come to launch our attack on heaven. We do so, with vengeance in our hearts, and hatred in our minds. Surzek's Lucifer's words echoed throughout the wide open field in front of him. Legions of devils, all at the position of attention, hearing his every word. The Satan, surrounded by a stoic Seraphal Leviathan on his left, and Ajuka Beelzebub and Falbium Asmodeus on his right side, peered down from the top balcony of the Satan's estate. Each Satan encased in ornate armor, with the one named Lucifer being the most elegant. The fallen have attacked us, my family, my sister, my Rias, he said before gesturing toward Seraphal. They've taken her Sona, her beloved sister, and then they will take yours. Surzek's voice naturally boomed in the underworld, pointing at the massive formation of devils in front of him. Unless we stop them. Looking in the direction of what used to be Dragon Mountain, he sighed before continuing. Heaven has a weapon that can level entire dimensions. We cannot and will not rest until the fires of hell singe the pearly gates of heaven. It's us or them, he boomed again. Is that so? Surzek narrowed his eyes at that smooth, mocking voice. He only heard it once, but it was a voice that he would never forget. The melodious voice pierced the silence of the sky as everyone looked at the source. Rise of Riven Lucifer, the son of the original Lucifer. He was hovering in the air, his massive devil wings unfurled. Narrowing his eyes, he saw the descendants of the other original Satans behind him. Kateria Leviathan, Shalba Beelzebub, Cruzari Asmodeus. Even further back, legions of extra devils, hundreds of them. Surzek saw Euclid Lucifuge, staring at him, and at his sister, Graphia. He gritted his teeth, clenching his fists in anger. Rise of them displayed his pearly white teeth as he raised his palms, in acceptance. I'm not here to fight you, Rise of him said before gesturing to the other 3 Satans behind him. None of us are, Kateria spoke. Of course I plan on getting my throne back, but there isn't going to be a throne worth getting if nothing is left standing. Cruzari huffed, crossing his arms across his. See, we are perfectly reasonable devils. We can get back to the killing each other after all this is done, Rise of him said, landing on the balcony. Staring the son of Lucifer down, Surzek stepped forward. Truce? He held his hand out. Truce. Azazel coughed, trudging through the endless expanse of the purgatory, a realm that acted as a dumping ground for all factions. Behind him were legions of fallen angels, newbies and battle-hardened veterans comprising their ranks. Why are we taking this? Penemu grunted, throwing a gorilla tiger off her and into a tree. Barakiel pinned the gorilla tiger to the tree with a light spear to the stomach, and put the beast out of its misery with a swift slice of a light blade. Way again. Azazel halted the legions with a palm of his hand, kneeling down at the junction of the river. It's the fastest back channel to heaven. Azazel stood back up, and motioning with his hand, began to move the fallen angels along the left side of the river. How do you know where we are going? Issei turned to the source of the voice, a young swordsman named Paul. All of the humans were traveling in magical orbs, hundreds of them, each holding 4 to 5 humans in them. Issei's being in the front, with all others following behind him in the void of the dimensional gap. The dimensional gap ebbs and flows, but certain things remain the same, Issei said, guiding the orb into a ravine. Hundreds of yellow orbs descended behind him, hugging the sides of the cliffs behind their leader. See that? Issei pointed at the river below him. Paul nodded, noting the red hue of the river in the dimensional gap. The rivers of Babylon aren't just a phrase from the Bible, they were the first rivers after Eden. They connect many realms to heaven. This is just the one that flows through the dimensional gap. Follow the river back to its source. Paul nodded, his agape in wonder at the knowledge of his leader. A wind swept the city of Agrias in the underworld. Now this would be no cause of concern, if the winds weren't over 300 kilometers an hour. Citizens evacuated the city during the sudden and surprising typhoon, leaving only a handful of devils on the floating piece of rock. Ah! What's causing this? A brown-haired man in a white lab coat shouted, gripping on a handrail as he made his way up the stairs. A brief flash of light jerked his gaze upwards as the sky opened. The last thing he heard is a tremendous bang, and the last thing he felt was being incinerated. After chopping down the vines that were in the forest of the harlot, the last major forest of purgatory, Azazel held his hand up. Gesturing at the luscious landscape in front of him, he pointed at the river below him. There! The portal to the third heaven is down there! Azazel yelled out, jumping off the cliff and diving into the water head first. And 3, 2, 1, Issei said softly, as the landscape suddenly changed. Gone was the dreary, red atmosphere of the dimensional gap. In was the seemingly infinite blocks of concrete buildings that dominated the landscape. At first glance one would think it was a metropolis in any major country, except for the fact that the streets were made of clouds and there were no cars in sight. Falling gently to the ground, Issei saw angels in the faint distance as the others dropped all around him. What are they doing? Chow Chow asked, as the sounds of battle were evident in the distance. Issei shrugged his shoulders, feeling the slow creep of devil magic on his skin. Dunno, but let's go before they find us. Sirzek's Lucifer closed his eyes, waiting for the right moment. As the trumpets sounded, the power of destruction was released, shooting towards the pearly gates of heaven. Crashing into them and blowing them to nothingness, hordes of devils charged through the opening. Off to his side, Ajuka mused the battle. Heaven can wait, or can it now? The battle has begun, and it will end, shall one of us not? With a bitter smile, he launched a wave of magic at the angels on the walls. The devils have penetrated the second heaven, and the fallen are at the doorsteps of Eden. Michael slammed his fists on the table, snarling at the messenger. Send the exorcists against devils, and ready the holy water barge. Sir! The messenger rushed out, his wings fluttering like a typhoon. Looking at the seraphim, Michael hardened his gaze. Ready the weapon? The first level is lost. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow the Skylinemaster for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.